before we get too far into the meeting's content today. So I'll begin by sharing the agenda for today with you. So I will share my screen and get us going with our presentation today. All right, so to begin, today is a required meeting, and I believe all of you know that at least one representative from your college is required to attend the semi-annual Perkins Technical Assistance Meeting in order to continue eligibility for Perkins federal funding. So we will take attendance through Teams. I can download that after today's meeting, but I would like for you to go ahead and just practice using the chat. So if you would just give us your name and the college that you're representing today, if you would enter that into the chat and just give us a good morning, we'd love to see your name there. Okay. So the agenda for today, before I go through each item here, I do want to mention that we are planning for a break at 9:15 Central Time. Breaks are very important, so I want you to have that in your mind. So if you need to slip out to go to the restroom or get a drink, we are planning for a break from 9:15 to 9:30 Central Time. We are also planning for lunch from 11:30 to 12:30 Central Time, so 12:30 to 1:30 Eastern Time. So today we'll look at a Perkins 5 overview in the state of Tennessee. We'll look at the required documentation for Perkins 5. Yes, there is a lot of required documentation, so we'll go through that month by month. We'll look at the calendar that breaks that down, the comprehensive local needs assessment, which is now a required piece of the basic grant local application. The majority of our meeting today will be spent focusing on the completion of the basic grant application for your college for the 2021-2022 year. We'll look at state determined levels of performance, which now must also be included within your application. Local use of funds, so the different categories that you may spend your Perkins dollars on. The 4-year application, the reserve grant application, early post-secondary opportunities, programs of study, Perkins equipment, monitoring. There are 4 levels of monitoring, and we'll look at those. Action plans, which were not required this year since we were using baseline Perkins data for our consolidated annual report, but they will be required next year, so we'll talk about those. Uniform grant guidance report, the annual risk assessment, which you all just turned in at the end of March. We'll look at the quarterly reimbursement report, which is due by the end of this month for quarter 3, state audit, and then we'll take questions along the way. Please feel free to use the chat at any time. We'll also take breaks for questions specifically, so if you'd like to unmute during those times and ask your question verbally, you are more than welcome to do that. We're also planning to allow time in the afternoon for you to work on your local level basic grant application. Our plan is after lunch to allow you that time to work on your application as long as we've made it through all of our agenda items this morning. So we hope to do that. So Michael is going to give us a Perkins 5 overview.
Beautiful. Thank you, Shana. We've had several people join us since we've started already this morning, so I want to make sure that if you didn't already know, please put your name and your college name in the chat so we have a record of that as well for today's meeting. This is the required meetings are part of what we have to do for the Perkins funding. So this is not a TBR requirement. It's not a Michael requirement. It is literally in the legislation that we have to have technical assistance. The State Comptroller's Office requires that we do these on a semi-regular basis and that we maintain documentation of who's intended. So that's what this process is about. Before I get into the a little bit of the overview of the Perkins 5, I do want to say welcome to some of our new Perkins folks on the college campuses and share my appreciation for all of you, because I don't believe there may only be one or two of you across the 40 colleges that this is your primary job. Most all of you, this is an additional hat that you wear beyond your other duties. And so Shane and I truly do understand that, and Joy as well. She's on board with our Perkins and helps out with some of that too, Joy Rich. So we all understand that this is just one more thing that you do. So we do strive diligently to try to be the experts for you all, so that when you have questions that you can reach out, and you may feel like that it's something you should already know, and maybe that's true, but there's not an expectation from our office that you do know everything about Perkins. And sometimes you'll have questions because everybody on your campus is looking at you as the expert for Perkins. And we truly do spend our hours in the legislation on a regular basis, so that we can be assistants to you, so that you can spend your funds legally. We allow total freedom as far as it goes for your college campus to be able to spend your funds that is appropriate to your college and that's appropriate to your community. We just want to make sure that you're legal in doing so. So each of the requirements that you'll see that we go over in these type of technical assistance meetings, number one, meet the federal definition of what you should be doing with your funds and how you should be implementing that throughout the year. That's what we're here for, and to support you in those. Shane and I are happy to give you best practices, what other colleges are and how they're utilizing their funds across the country. We can give you that information, but we will both always tell you that those decisions are left up to you. We are going to make sure that you remain legal in giving you the proper advice in how to do that. So the reports that we ask you to do, and all those things that are one more thing for you to do, those are not things that we just make up for you to do. Those are things that are part of the legislation. So I just want to say that, because we truly do feel like our job is to support you all at the college campus. And sometimes this amount of money is not a lot, and sometimes it doesn't feel like it warrants the amount of work that's tied to it. I don't argue that with you. We do have some colleges, just one or two at this point now, that choose not to take Perkins dollars simply because of those requirements, and those funds are then spread out as more reserve dollars or more basic dollars that go into the bigger pot. So if you haven't been around for Perkins 4, which was part of what we did for 12 years, then learning what's new about Perkins 5 won't be that dramatic for you. And the good news is you won't have to learn Perkins 4. Perkins 5 now, which is officially called the Strengthening Career and Technical Education Act, Education for the 21st Century Act, was passed in July of 2018. And that gave us a full year until 2019 of July 1 in order to enact Perkins 5. And then we had a pandemic hit, and they gave us basically another year from most of the requirements, or at least gave us an extended timeline on some of those requirements. So if whether you've been doing Perkins for more than 10 years, or this is your first year, this has been an unusual year in all aspects, and definitely in the aspect of Perkins as well. Carl D. Perkins was a senator from the state of Kentucky. He fought for career and technical education, what was known as vocational education back then, for 40 years. And he fought for funding. Technical education has been getting funding from Congress for now 102 years, going on 103 years, every single year. It's the only fund that has come out of Congress every year for that length of time. Nothing's even, the next closest thing is like 40 or 50 years. It's not, that has been remarkable that every year there's been funding for career and technical education. It's now over $1 billion annually that comes out to the states. But we're in a place now that Tennessee, Shane, I still can't advance it. If you can go ahead and advance it. So within the state of Tennessee, for that 1.3 billion, we get about 28 million as a state. But 85% of that goes to the Tennessee Department of Education. They are what's considered the grantee of the state funds for Perkins. Every state is required by legislation to have a single grantee who gets all the funds. And then from that point, there are MOUs which are memorandums of understanding that then allow distribution of funds to different places. So since the State Department of Education in Tennessee is the grantee, TBR is a subgrantee. And so that we have agreed to get to accept 15% of those funds of that $26, $27, $28 million from the Congress that goes to Tennessee, and we get about 15% of that. Now that 15% is important because in the legislation, if we got 1 percentage point higher, if we got 16% of those funds, then all of the funds would be distributed based upon your Pell eligibility and the numbers of students at your colleges. And for those who've been around for a few years, about 3 years ago, I distributed what that would look like. We had about 10 campuses that would probably double in the amount that they receive out of Perkins, but every other college out of all 40 would end up losing funding. You would be decreased. We had some colleges that go down to about $11,000 or $12,000. And so as of this point, right now, also we had the chancellor last year sought to increase that percentage with the Tennessee Department of Education, had discussions with the governor, had discussions with the commissioner at the Department of Education, and basically they did not want to budge off of that percentage. And who has the final say in that? The governor does. And the governor decided that these are my words, not the governor's words, but it would be a political it would be difficult politically, especially if those parents or secondary schools were talking about losing millions of dollars from their schools in career and technical education funds. So that's a difficult political maneuver to not to increase our percentage, but to decrease the secondary. So for whatever reason, this was not the right time for that to change. But I appreciate the chancellor standing up for our colleges and trying to make that happen, as we had meetings after meetings for a good year with the Tennessee Department of Education and the governor's office. So we are currently still at the 15%. That 15% means that we can divide those funds however we see appropriate within a certain limitations. And part of that is that we do so 50-50, 50% going to the community colleges and 50% going to the TCATs, the technical colleges. That was designed basically from a meeting that we had in 2006. We had a representative from every college, and they got together and they said, hey, how are we going to divide this money up? And basically it was decided that whether you're a big college or a small college, if you have to buy machine tool equipment, that if you have to buy a $200,000 piece of equipment, it doesn't matter if you have 1,000 students in that program or if you only have 10 students in that program, that piece of machinery is still the same amount. So way back in 2006, we decided as a group of colleges that we would just split those funds evenly between the TCATs and the community colleges. And then those amounts would be divided between the colleges within each of those two divisions. So July 1st is the beginning of every fiscal year for Perkins. And the way this operates is that the U.S. Department of Education sends a grant award notification to each state grantee. Again, in Tennessee, that's the Department of Education. So on July 1st, they send that to the Tennessee Department of Education. On July 1st, we should get a grant award notification from the Tennessee Department of Education. Over the last 3 or 4 years, those have been later than July 1st. And if I'm not mistaken, that we got those in November or December of this year. So as soon as we get those grant award notifications, they are sent out to the colleges so that you folks know that the U.S. Department of Education, i.e. through Congress, has verified that you can spend your Perkins dollars. There's been discussions on throughout the recent years if you can spend dollars before that. And the short answer is yes. Basically, Congress has said, even though you haven't received your grant award notification, if there's an MOU between the grantee and a subgrantee, then that basically guarantees those funds. And so there have been presidents over the past years that have felt uncomfortable spending the funds until they get that grant award notification. And basically, that's a president's call, because for the main part, I want you to understand that Perkins is a reimbursed funding account. For example, if you're going to spend $100,000 on equipment and you decide to spend that all July 1st and you get it all because you want it all delivered before the semester or trimester start, the next trimester starts, and you do that. And then for some unknown reason, Perkins doesn't get passed. Let's say Perkins 6 doesn't get passed and there's no more career and technical education, then the college has spent those funds on their own. So that makes a little bit some presidents uneasy, understandably. The one thing that I do, again, that I will stress, and that I have in the presidents in the past, is that for now over 100 years, Perkins has come out of Congress every year, and that's not been a situation. Perkins 5 has now 5 years, or got 4 years left on it, so we know for 4 years it's guaranteed. It's already been appropriated and done that way. Once this 4 years is up, then unless Congress passes a new Perkins, then it'll be annually agreed upon and validated and approved by Congress annually. So that's why Perkins 4, which was a 5 or 6 year plan, had to be approved annually after that first 6 years. And so it lasted for 12 years total. But instead of passing an additional Perkins after Perkins 4, they just annually appropriated the funds for it. And usually it was a little later than past July 1. So there was a little bit more concern about that. But going back to what I said at the very beginning is that Shana and I are just here to help support you. You will notice some changes over this last year if you've been around Perkins for more than a year, is that Shana has helped institute newsletters. We do monthly Perkins Technical Assistance Meetings and a Q&A opportunity during each month. So part of this is, again, knowing that this is not your only hat that you wear, but the more opportunities that we allow you to learn more about Perkins, maybe you can take an hour and do some of those videos. Maybe you can jump in for an hour or 30 minutes and ask a few questions. If there's a designated time that we can set up each month, we're trying to make that easier for you to be able to learn a little bit more about Perkins. And maybe sometimes if you hear the same thing over and over, maybe it's how to do a report or just a simple question that bugs you every once in a while. If we can answer that multiple times throughout the year, then maybe that does become part of your common knowledge as you work through Perkins or as you do other things and have to come back to Perkins on a semi-regular basis. So those are some of the structural changes that hopefully you've noticed throughout this last year. And I think what we've seen proven out to be beneficial is that this was our first state comptroller audit where we had no colleges that had any findings. And so kudos to you all as colleges and as you as Perkins coordinators at your particular college that things were going well this past year and how you've been spending and making sure that you do that appropriately. When I say appropriately, I mean legally. Again, because the way that you decide how to spend those funds at your college is going to be based upon some particulars that we'll discuss here, but basically to make sure that that's done legally. So, Shane, I believe that's the last slide for the intro. Yep, good, perfect. Yeah. So, Shane, I'm going to turn it over to Shana for some required documentation.
Okay, yay, the fun part, right? The required documentation. There is a lot of it. And we understand that, and Michael's already said, we understand that Perkins is a very small part of your job responsibilities, but there's a lot of required documentation with Perkins. So what we've tried to do to make it easier for you is to break it down month by month. So you have basically one report per month. There are some months where you don't have a report that's due, but rather than having 12 reports due in May when the basic grant application is also due, we've broken it down month by month to hopefully help spread it out and make it a little easier for you. So this is the Perkins 5 required documentation calendar for 2021. Begins in January with the third quarter action plans. They were not required this year, but they will be next year. Those are for any failed performance indicators on the CAR report. Also, if there are any updates to your consolidated annual report information, if there are any significant changes from what was reported in December, you have the opportunity to update that information in January. In February, the Unified Grant Guidance Report is due, and these are all due at the end of the month, the last business day of the month. In March, the Risk Assessment. April, the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment. So the CLNA is actually a piece that is required with the basic grant application. We separated it because basically you're completing your basic grant application as a result of the information that was gathered from the Comprehensive Local Needs Assessment. So we thought it made sense to have the CLNA due in April, and then based on those results, the basic grant application is due in May. We typically have our required spring Perkins Technical Assistance Meeting in April, and then one again in December. In May, the grant application is due for the next year. In June, the reserve grant application is due if your college chooses to apply. In July, early post-secondary opportunities documentation. August, program of study. September, the ongoing Perkins equipment list. This is the Perkins equipment list that should just go on forever. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. In October, monitoring. There are 4 different levels of monitoring: desk monitoring, self-assessment monitoring, virtual monitoring, and then level 4 would be a full monitoring or an on-site monitoring. In November, the consolidated annual report is due. This is primarily your institutional research staff working with research staff at TBR. Chris Tingle in the Office of Data and Strategy at TBR is our primary contact for the data for the CAR report. And then typically it's the CAR information is available for you to bring with you to the Perkins Technical Assistance Meeting in December, and we usually look over that and discuss that together as a group. Once again, all due dates are the last business day of the month, and currently we're submitting those assignments through the Perkins team in Microsoft Teams. So if you are not a member of that team, if we have any new coordinators or someone who's filling in for a coordinator who couldn't make today's meeting, and you want to be a member of that team, just send me an email and let me know, and I can add you as a member to the team. Once you're a member, at the beginning of each month, you'll receive a notification that an assignment has been posted, and that assignment will be for whichever of these required reports is due at the end of the month. If you click on the assignment, you'll have some short instructions. You'll have a template for the report. You typically have a sample, so a report that's been filled in with some sample information. And for most of these reports, you also have a technical assistance video. They're usually 5 to 10 minutes in length, and it's just some additional technical assistance on how to complete that month's report. When you finish the report, you upload it to that assignment. You just upload the document and you click turn in, and then all of that information is submitted through that Teams portal. Comprehensive local needs assessment. Michael is going to talk about this one.
Yes. Okay. So this is very purposeful that we are at this point in the year. For those who haven't been around for many, many years in Perkins, we chose April very strategically so that up to this point, at least in the spring, on a normal year, you've got many things going on. This year, obviously compounded with COVID. And so Perkins kind of gets on the back burner. But your plan that has to be turned in your application, it used to be called in Perkins 4. Your application for the next fiscal year is due at the end of May. And so in order for us to score those in the month of June so that you get your funds on July 1, that requirement is by the end of May, the last business day in May. And so we purposely then put this particular meeting together in April several years ago so that you could actually work on your plan, that you could refocus on Perkins, or your application. When I say plan, that's Perkins 4 terms. I apologize. I'll try to keep correcting myself. So that in April, you now have the opportunity to work through your application. Well, Perkins 5, one of the big changes, one of the major changes, and there's probably 3 or 4, and we'll discuss those all today. One of the biggest changes within Perkins 5 is the comprehensive local needs assessment. Now, fortunately, Tennessee is one of the few states that already had a process in place that was very similar to the CLNA, or at least the vehicle for how the CLNA gets implemented. And that's our program advisory committees within each CTE program. And so the comprehensive local needs assessment, as you see on the screen, this is the legislative language in section 134C. The only thing that's different here is in part B here, we update this annually. And the reason that we update it annually in Tennessee is simply because it's a part of the process for making sure that your application is correct. And so and yes, it's been unique this past year with COVID, but we're able to get back on track. Hopefully your colleges have been able to get back on track, at least virtually this spring. And so if you have a CTE program, and I like to use welding as an example, typically, if your welding program advisory council or committee has met and decided that they need another instructor or they need more equipment because it's old, then they will submit that to what typically colleges have, which is a CLNA college committee. It doesn't have to be that way. That's me saying that this is a best practice. Or some colleges have an individual, whether it's the president or vice president, that makes the determination of how the Perkins funds get spent. However, if you do not have a CLNA from each program, then those programs that don't have one submitted can't get Perkins dollars. So I want to just make sure we're clear on that. So the reason this is due in April, like what Shana was saying or just a few moments earlier, is that since your application is due in May, if your welding program doesn't have a CLNA submitted by the end of April to you and to TBR, then they're not eligible for Perkins funds the next July 1. So that's pretty simple. And during this COVID time, we had some questions that make sense that said, well, we couldn't have a meeting. Well, you can do virtual meetings. You can communicate. And when I say you, I'm talking about the instructors or the program area supervisors, if you will. They can communicate with business and industry. They can communicate with students. They can communicate with instructors, with parents, and with the other stakeholders, and have that communication, if it's individual phone calls or individual emails, and collect information as well. And then if folks can't attend a virtual meeting, then there's follow-up information that can be communicated out and reached out. So there are ways to do it. Yes, it's difficult. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying this is an easy process. For the Perkins coordinator yourself, what's best is that if you can understand the process, or have Shana and I help you understand the process. I've even went out to colleges and actually helped conduct this portion of a program advisory committee. Go through this process with them the first time. And so that helps, because once you understand that for your college, then you can help the instructors or whoever those individuals are that are leading the individual program advisory committees, so that they can get the right information back from those programs, so that can be funneled up to the college level, which then impacts the application for the fiscal year. What you see on the screen first is the 6 areas within the CLNA. If you go to the next slide, Shana, those are actually broken out from the legislation you see on this page. So A, B, C, D, and E are 5 of those sections, and within B there are 2. B has size, scope, and quality as Roman numeral smaller lowercase I, and then double I is the industry sector occupations. So go back one slide, Shana. This is the summary of the legislation that you saw on the next page. So just keeping the summary page up for you. I think we've given Shana, I'm looking for a nod from you. I believe we have the legislation in a PDF format within Teams. Yes, good, thank you.
Yes.
So if you're the person that likes to go and dig through the legislation, I wholeheartedly encourage you to do that. That's something that Shane and I have to do and revisit on a regular basis, so that we can make sure we're giving you real good advice when you ask questions about how to move forward. But the legislation, we always point back to the legislation. We don't have a number 7 in here because we just thought that would be cool. We have 6 of them because, go to the next slide, Shana, because those 6 areas are listed within the legislation. And this is, if you see number 2 at the top, requirements. The comprehensive local needs assessment described under paragraph 1 shall include, and that shall is very important. That means those 6 sections that you see listed there, B having 2 of them, are required within the local needs assessment. Go ahead, Shana. Next slide, please. So how do you get this data? So again, if you think about this from your program advisory committee, all of you, whether you're brand new to Perkins or not, you probably know about your program advisory committees that you have across your college campuses, that they pull data typically locally, but also some of that can be utilized regionally, and also can be utilized statewide. So here's some options here how to pull your data. If for some reason your particular area, because it's rural or because it's urban, has different data, that's possible. And so your particular college may have data that looks differently than it does across the region or across the state. That's okay. just as long as you have that data and you can confirm that data as well. So you're not going to get an argument when you say that your data says X, Y, or Z, even though that's differing than across the state or even across the country, because your communities are unique. And particularly with our TCATs and our community colleges, Tennessee is obviously a unique state. We're even unique across the 3 regions. And within those 3 regions, we have very specific populations that are different. So that's understandable. So just make sure that you're pulling your data. You're going to have additional data sources than you saw on that previous slide. So that's okay. Just make sure that those program advisory committees are doing that. And sometimes that local business and industry is the most important data that you can get. This is just a quick screenshot of the pages that are built within the template that we have on the CLNA. You'll see, I know you can't read these, but they are available for you. Those gray areas are basically what we took out of legislation, basically copy and pasted it and built a question around it so that you could answer that. And so if you have this document in the hands of your instructors or whoever's leading those program advisory committee minutes or those meetings, they can answer these questions and then submit this document, whether it's electronically or handwritten, to whoever collects all of that information, the Perkins coordinator particularly, for the college. And so you might, if you have 10 programs, we're looking at 4 pages here, that means you might have 40 of these pages or 10 of these documents that are completed. And then what you're going to do as a Perkins coordinator or someone else that's designated to do so is you're going to take those CLNAs by each program, and there's going to be a determination made that says, okay, you know what, with all of these CLNAs, everybody wants equipment, everybody needs another instructor, right? So how are we going to decide how to spend that money? Well, again, that's where the college gets to make that decision. I will tell you that some colleges do. I'll tell you what we have across Tennessee. We have some colleges who give the money, all their money, to the same program every year. Yeah, that's hard to believe. We have 1 or 2 colleges that do that. I have frequent conversations with the president saying that's not best practice, but it is allowable. Most of our colleges do one of the next 2 options, which is there is an individual or a small group of individuals, sometimes administrators, who take these CLNAs and then they decide, you know what, this year we're going to give it to this program, and next year we're going to give it to this program, and then the 3rd year we're going to give it to this program. So they make a plan that they're going to rotate the dollars. Then we have other colleges who have a group of individuals who either oversee the programs or are the instructors themselves that get into a room, whether it's virtually or usually it would be at a real room, and they'll have this discussion. Hey, I really need this equipment this year. It's 20 years old. And this other person says, well, I need this equipment too, but it's only 5 years old. How about can I get 1 piece and you get 1 piece? Or they actually have this and they have a conversation, they work it out. They talk about what the business industry said, they get copies of the CLNAs and they work that process out as a college and then they agree to that. That's more of a best practice. It's not a requirement. The college can decide how to divide those funds up. But the number 1 rule is there has to be a CLNA. If there's not a CLNA from a program, then they can't get Perkins dollars. Now, the question has come up a couple of times, which is a very valid question. What if we didn't do our CLNA this year? We failed to do that. Well, then the July $1 go out and your program doesn't get those dollars. Then as soon as you don't meet till the fall, then you submit your CLNA for the fall. And then what could happen is your college could make a change to their application and then include you in those dollars if the college so wanted to do that. So there are ways, this is an ebb and flow. Things can be modified throughout the year as long as you get approval ahead of time. So that would be an email to Shayna and I usually, so that we just both are in the know, to say, hey, we need to update our application. We've had that done, I don't know, a dozen times probably this spring already. We've had colleges come up and say, oh, we have extra money because we hired someone late, so we have a few extra $1,000. We'd like to buy some stuff. Okay, great. Or this equipment was cheaper than we thought it was going to be. We need to change our application because we have extra dollars. Or this equipment was more expensive than we thought, so we have less money than we thought available, so we need to change our application. Your application, which Shayna will discuss in a few minutes, is the gateway to how you spend your dollars. You have to stick to your application and what you say you're going to spend on it. But that is based strictly on this CLNA. Those decisions have to be made, how you're going to spend your dollars in your application from your CLNA. So with COVID slowly melting away, slowly, hopefully, we are getting back to requirements. And there was a letter from DOE that came out this morning in relation to methods of administration. Method of administration and Perkins are getting more closely aligned. They want one to be more dependent on the other. MOA should be somewhat dependent on some of the Perkins reports that we're doing. So those things are changing as we move along. And so we're getting back to more of the normalcy of the requirements and sticking to the timelines that are laid out. So I say that to say, as we're moving away from COVID or out of COVID a little bit, just remember that we're here to help you all, and we're going to do what we can to accommodate what we can for you and give you the assistance you need. Shane, is that the last slide? I think so. Awesome.
Yes.
All right. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions around this simply because this is due this month. So I will take a minute for questions if somebody wants to come off mute and ask a question. While some of you are deciding if you want to do that, if you have a question, you're afraid to really ask it out loud, please just put it in the chat. And while Shayna's going through the next section, I'd be I can look at those and type in the answers in there as well, so that everybody can see that without interrupting Shayna. So I'll give everyone about another minute, and then Shayna will start the next section.
Okay, I'll move on. Doesn't sound like anyone wants to speak up, so put those in the chat. Oh, I see one question. Do you want to answer it verbally, Michael, or do you want to answer?
No, anytime I can do it verbally, well, I don't know if it's quicker because I tend to be long-winded, but great question, Danny. What if it's a new program? And we have that happen almost every year at one of our colleges across the state. If it's a new startup, there usually is some background into why that program is being started, Danny. So usually there is, even if it's an administrator who decides to do that, whether it's the president or the vice president, usually there is some background of saying, why are we starting this welding program? We're not just going to start it because, hey, today's Tuesday and we're starting a welding program. Usually there's some background data. Even though you may not have a program advisory committee, you may have those folks who would be an impromptu committee based upon, and you can even say based upon administration's research and talking with business and industry before we formed a program advisory committee. This is an impromptu CLNA based upon that. So understanding that your college is not going to start a new program unless there's a need for one. It's just a matter of actually, I don't want to say proving that out, but showing that there was a process for that. Then that would do it if it was a new startup program. So we've had this happen every year from other campuses. Every college learns that things change in their community, and so they have to start a new program. So it's allowable. You just kind of have to document, and it's not a lengthy process, but it's just a matter of sharing, hey, we did some background, we talked business and industry, we realize there's a need in the community, whatever that specific information is for your community, and that would be enough to get the program funded through Perkins for the first CLNA. Thanks for the question, Danny. Go ahead, Shanna.
Okay. So the basic grant application, I'm going to go over kind of an overview of why the application is required, and then we're going to break it down piece by piece because there's a lot to the local application. This specific report or application has the most detail to it of any of the other reports that are required throughout the year. And since this is our spring meeting, we really want to focus some extra time on breaking down each of those pieces within the application and answering any questions you may have so that you can begin work on that application today, hopefully. So why is the local application needed? Each college submits a local application. It is a requirement of the Perkins 5 legislation. In order to receive Perkins funding, you must submit that local application. And this can be seen as the guide for the entire academic year. So in this application, you're going to provide details of any initiatives, events, professional development, purchases, equipment that you're going to buy, instructors that you're going to pay a salary for. All of that is detailed and laid out within the basic grant application each year. It can be revised throughout the year, and Michael has mentioned that already, and most of you know that if you've been around Perkins very long. You can revise it throughout the year. It just has to be in writing, so if you send us an email and say, hey, we'd like to move these funds around, and instead of these professional development trips that got canceled, now we have extra funds, we'd like to switch it over to equipment. We'll look through that, review it. We may ask you a couple of additional questions. We may say, hey, you might want to consider these things, just to make sure that you are staying legal with the Perkins 5 legislation. And then once we see that it looks legal and allowable, we will send you an email saying it is approved. Please revise the application and the budget. And then you send that back to us for our records, and I will send you a revised scoring rubric that basically just lists, okay, the application was revised on this date and it was approved for your records. So the local application is the college's contract for how they will support teacher and student growth with Perkins funds. So this is just a piece from the Perkins 5 legislation that further explains why the local application is required. If you love to read through the legislation, it's in section 134A, and you can read it there. The Perkins 5 legislation, Michael mentioned this earlier, it is on the Perkins team in Microsoft Teams. I believe it's under the class materials folder, under the Files tab at the top. So if you'd like to go look at that there, you're welcome to. It's always there. This is the whole section, section 134B, the contents of what must be included in the local application. So if you were around with us last year, you remember that U.S. Department of Education came back to us and said, the template that you're using for your application is missing some components. We felt like we had the components, but they wanted them described. So they wanted basically a narrative. They wanted a description. So we had to add some additional pieces and allow you all to provide that description in a narrative form. So that's why we added one additional piece actually two additional pieces to the basic grant application last year. We added the descriptive application, and we added the state determined levels of performance. So the key areas of the local application for Perkins. Of course, the results of the needs assessment, because everything within the application must come from the comprehensive local needs assessment. If it's not in the CLNA, it can't be in the application. Of course, it can be revised throughout the year. It can be added to the CLNA and then added to the application, like we mentioned earlier. Number 2, courses and activities to be supported by Perkins funds, including at least one state-approved program of study. This is one of those reasons why we require the program of study documentation that's due in the fall, I believe, because in order to receive Perkins funding, you must be providing that to a state-approved program of study for the benefit of that program. Number 3, description of career exploration, career guidance, and counseling to be provided in collaboration with workforce agencies and other partners. Number 4, description of academic and CTE integration. And number 5, description of activities for special populations. These are the key areas of the basic grant application. Number 6, description of work-based learning opportunities. Number 7, description of how students will be provided with opportunities to gain post-secondary credit while they're still in high school. Again, that's another report that sounds familiar to you if you've been around for a while in Perkins 5. The EPSO report is due, I believe it's in July. And again, it's going back to the requirements of the application that we have to have that documentation that these things are being provided. Number 8, description of how the eligible recipient will coordinate with the state and higher ed institutions to support recruitment, preparation, retention, and training, including professional development of educators. So professional development is always a piece that's included in the Perkins application. And then I believe this is the last one, number 9, description of how the eligible recipient will address disparities or gaps in performance among subpopulations. So those pieces you will see again whenever we look at the actual template for the basic grant application, but that's just a high-level overview of what's included in the application, and then we'll break it down when we get into that template. Here's a timeline of kind of what you can expect from today up until when your application is approved. So today is our local application training session. During this time, you're receiving training, and we're also going to allow time in the afternoon for you to begin work on your local application, on your goals and your action steps. In May, will be a time for campus level local application work sessions, drafting and revising your application, discussing through different departments, different programs, deciding on what those goals and action steps will be for your application. May 31st is when the application is due to TBR. May 31st is actually Memorial Day, a holiday, I just realized that, but it's okay. We'll just say May 31st, so you might want to have it in the Friday before you leave for Memorial Day. You will upload the final draft to the Perkins team in Microsoft Teams. At the beginning of May, I will have that assignment ready for you so you can upload it at any point throughout the month of May. And then July 1st is when applications will be approved, and substantially approved notices will go out to colleges. Like Michael said before, we may or may not have the grant award notification from the Tennessee Department of Education. Last year we received it at the end of November, and so we were had to work to get those letters together and out to you in the middle of December. But we can approve it at the TBR level, going back kind of to what Michael said earlier, and we'll list it as substantially approved, and then we'll still be pending the grant award notification letter from Tennessee Department of Education. When we receive that, we will send those out to each of our colleges. Funds spent prior to application approval are not reimbursable by Perkins. July 1 is the date. Cannot spend before July 1st. Changes to the application without written approval are also not reimbursable by Perkins. So if you see that you need to make adjustments and revisions to your application throughout the year, please just send Michael and I an email requesting to make that revision, and we will review it and provide you with approval status on that. Questions before we get into the details of the application?
Again, if you have those questions, if you want to just put them in the chat while I go on to the next section, Shana will be happy to answer those. She'll monitor the chat. I did answer a question while Shana was going through that. There was a question about a summer program and Perkins going to be paying for a stipend for an individual within the college for June and July. As you know, July 30th is the last day of the fiscal year. So what you'd want to do is, yes, spread that over 2 fiscal years. So once the stipend ends June 30th, then the July 1 Perkins for the next fiscal year should pick up and pay that stipend. So that question was in the chat, and that's something that we have a few colleges that tend to do that each year. So just make sure that it's in your application and been approved. Okay, the annual improvement summary report. This is another new part of Perkins 5. And if you think about it, it kind of does make a little bit of sense, even though it's a little bit more work. Basically, your annual application says you're going to set forth these goals, right? So there's a requirement of 2 goals for some of you that have done the application last year. There's a minimum requirement of 2 goals that you put in your application each year. And so In order to file for the application, if you look under the first tab, you'll see this annual improvement summary report, again, required by legislation. And all you're going to do is you're going to look back at the previous Perkins fiscal year goal, which would, in this case, is always going to be the current year, because you're going to look at what your current year goals are, and you're looking back over the last 10 to 12 months and saying, hey, did we achieve that goal? And so this is what this tab, this summary report's about. And the components of this summary report, we pull directly from legislation. It is simply the goal, the funds that were used, the amount, and the action steps that made up the goal, and if those were identifiable. If there were improvements, and then there's a summary question, basically, is what impact did Perkins Fund have on the institution the most recent year. So these 5 or 6 components of the summary report, we pulled directly out of legislation. None of those did we add. But basically, the purpose of this, FYI, is so that the college evaluates how they spent the funds the previous year. And at the time you're filling this out, it's actually the end of the current fiscal year. But you're filling this out going, we bought all of those those welders, and we didn't use any of them. Was that a wise use of money? Or we spent all that money on welders, and we had 40 more students go through the program this year. You know, that kind of, it's just kind of a self-reflection on the way that Perkins dollars were spent is really what Congress is wanting the high schools and colleges to do, is to evaluate how they spent their dollars and to take some self-reflection on that and if that was beneficial or not. And so there is not a penalty for your answers in this section. The goal is the self-reflection portion. Make sure it's accurate, yes. But Shana or I will not make decisions upon any future dollars based upon your answers. It's realistically a self-reflection. And the goal is, in the end, is that as Perkins or as a college, that you all grow from those self-reflections and you learn and move on. So if that was beneficial in that particular program and they needed more money and you decided, hey, be based upon looking at the self-reflection, maybe we should need to do X, Y, or Z. So all of those things, and those self-reflections, especially when it impacts a program, that might be worthwhile to give into a program advisory committee as well. So just depending on how that reflection goes is how else you can use those reflections. But there's not a determination on funds moving forward based upon how well you answer those questions. Just be honest. It's a self-reflection, and we glance over to make sure, number one, that you did actually answer them correctly, meaning that, yes, you did buy welders and you bought them for this program and et cetera and so forth. But most of that is a real reflection on how you spent those dollars, and that's the purpose of that section. If you have questions over that, it is a requirement, though. If you don't fill it out, then you can't actually get your next year's dollars. So while it's a reflection, it's just still required. Congress, will have congressional members that, for whatever reason, will pick out a particular state, maybe their own state, and kind of run through some of those just to see what those look like and make sure that those are being reflected on. So make sure to do that. And Congress does like to see those kind of reports as well. If there's no other questions with that, if you do have questions, put them in the chat. Otherwise, Shannon will move us on.
So the next section, which is the second tab in the basic grant application, which is an Excel file. If you're a new Perkins coordinator, you haven't seen this, the grant application is an Excel file. And I actually sent that out to everyone this morning. It was around 7:30 before our meeting today. I sent you the updated basic grant application template for 21-22. And then I also sent you a basic grant application guide with definitions and explanations for each of these sections of the template. So those two pieces that I sent to your email this morning are going to be very useful to you as you work through completing your basic grant application within the next couple of months. So this piece is the descriptive application. This is one of the pieces that was added after July 1st last year. U.S. Department of Education came back to us and said, we don't see section 134B 1 through 9 in a descriptive way. So we came back and added it to the application and allowed for you to provide a description through narrative form. So this is pulled literally straight from the Perkins 5 legislation, section 134B 1 through 9. So we're asking that you read through each piece. For example, part 1. So provide a description of the results of the comprehensive needs assessment conducted under subsection C. So this is a brief description. We're not asking you to rewrite the entire CLNA in this area. Just provide a brief description of the results of the CLNA and how you're spending dollars based on the CLNA results in this application. So for each of those items, I think there are 9 different sections. You're providing a narrative response. It's all contained within the second worksheet in that Excel file. You'll just have to scroll down to see the pieces, and this is a screenshot here of the different items there. State determined levels of performance. This was another piece that was added to the application last year. And it was a late add. These 2 worksheets were the 2 late adds. But the legislation also says that the state determined levels of performance for that year must be included within the basic grant application. So it's the 3rd tab of your basic grant application template. And this year, I went ahead and added it in for everyone. Michael, I hope that's okay. I didn't ask you first, but I figured if everyone, if all of our community colleges have the same level of performance and all of our TCATs have the same state determined level of performance, if I could take one minor item off of your plate and save you time looking for this document and trying to find what is our state determined level of performance this year, if I could put it there for you, I wanted to go ahead and do that. So whenever you open up your template from your email, you're going to see that I've listed 1P1 retention and placement, 2P1 credential, certificate, or degree, and 3P1 non-traditional enrollment. And you'll see 2 lines. One is the community college STLOP, and one is the technical college STLOP. So really, you don't have to do anything with this worksheet. It's there for you. I know that's not a lot, but at least it's one minor piece that you don't have to look for. And these are the state determined levels of performance for the 2022 year. So community colleges, 1P1 is 52.9% is our goal, 2P1, 44.1, and 3P1, 19.8. Those are our state determined levels of performance for community colleges moving forward into the 21-22 year. For technical colleges, our state determined level of performance for 1P1 is 52.9, for 2P1, 66.2, and then for 3P1, 8.8. And again, those state determined levels of performance are on the Perkins team under class materials, and it lists them for all 4 years of this grant cycle. So you can see this year's, and you can also look forward to the next year as well. Okay, goals section.
All right, thank you, Shayna. Just as a brief reminder that for those who've been around for any length of time with Perkins, we used to annually set our goals as individual colleges as a system. I used to have to negotiate with the U.S. Department of Education every year saying that saying that our goal for 1P1 is X. And the U.S. Department of Education would always come back and say, well, we recommend it be Y. And usually, yeah, thank you, Shannon, for pulling that back up. And so that was an annual negotiation. Well, in the Perkins 5 legislation, basically the legislation said that a state will set their goals for 4 years. And there would be no negotiations with the U.S. Department of Education. The state would set those based upon previous goals and what they anticipate. And so we did a very careful calculation. We included Chris Tingle in this conversation, our data research person. We talked with the IR departments across the colleges as well to make sure that these were not going to be too much. Also, we had to take into account we were the only state in the entire U.S. that the definition of a concentrator was drastically different in the new legislation than it was in Perkins 4. In Perkins 4, every state got to decide what a concentrator was, how a concentrator was defined. In the state of Tennessee, our concentrator definition was 30 credit hours, or the equivalent on the TCAT side, which on the TCAT side was after they completed a trimester for equivalency. Every other state was primarily either 9 credit hours, or the technical clock hour equivalent, or 12 semester credit hours, or the TCAT equivalent credit seat hours, clock hours. When that switched to what in the Perkins 5 legislation, it made it mandatory across the U.S. that it would be a standard 12 credit hours. They didn't even include clock hours anymore. Basically, they don't even reference what we used to call adult students. It's all college students now, which is a different discussion, but nonetheless. So basically, we had to transition because that changes. If you think of a formula, right, a mathematical formula, in this case, it's a numerator and denominator. The concentrator is the denominator. So if you think I'm going to go with the college, community college side. So a student has 30 credit hours. They are eligible to be in the formula, so they go in the denominator. And then depending on the indicator, if they were successful in the indicator, then they would also count in the numerator. So one student over one student is 100%, right? Well, obviously what happens a lot is that you have more students in the denominator than the numerator, which gets us below 100%. Well, what happened is when the requirement changed to 12 credit hours, Tennessee went from 30 credit hours to 12 credit hours is the requirement for the denominator. Well, that made our denominator balloon. So we had a lot more students that were included in the denominator. Our numerator didn't change because if our students weren't in the denominator previously, there was no way they were successful in the numerator, right? So what happened is we knew that we were going to have a lowering of our percentages based upon our denominators changing. Now, fortunately for the TCATs, it worked out well that it's still the same denominator, which means the student had to complete the first trimester before they would go into the denominator either way. So fortunately for our TCATs, that didn't impact them like it did our community colleges. But nonetheless, since we didn't have a change, or since the legislation doesn't speak to adult indicators, only college indicators, that means all of our colleges then had to be 1P1, 2P1, and 3P1. We couldn't have the 1A1 and 2A1 as we did for the TCATs previously. But basically, we did group by the type of college what the goal was going to be. So when we talk about non-traditional students, all of you that have done this for more than a year know that that's one of our harder categories to make at the college level. And so you'll see that's one of the bigger differences in the percentages between the TCATs and the community colleges. And even then, it's still a difficult goal, but we still move forward with that. So those goals are preset for 4 years. Once Perkins 5 gets to the end of the 4-year cycle, we will then have to create another 4-year plan, even though even though Congress will only approve Perkins potentially year by year. We'll have to be operating on a new 4-year plan, which means we'll set another set of 4-year goals. So please pay attention as we go through the next couple of years with Perkins and pay attention to the goals. I mean, we'll do so at the TBR level, but we already trying to make plans for the next 4-year cycle of goals, because what I don't want to have to do, and I know you don't, is that if a college doesn't make those goals, is then having to focus money in a particular way that makes you concentrate on that particular deficit of the goals, or excuse me, of the performance goals. Now on to the next section, which is your application goals. So Shane, if you'll go ahead and go to the next slide.
Sure. And I don't know if you saw the question in the chat. I think they're referring to their local 4-year plan, or the 4-year application. They did it a couple of years ago, was very brief in nature. How will that factor into doing this year's application?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, so thank you for the question. So it's a couple of things. So there was so in Perkins 4, we had to do a 4-year plan that's different than what Perkins 5 is. So Charles, my first answer would be is you can partially set it to the side. Doesn't mean you can't pull from it and make decisions based upon it, but you will create annually a 4-year plan every year. And then so for for this next application, part of what you'll do is a 4-year plan. The first year will be this next coming year, 21-22. And then you'll do a brief summary. I think we have a sample of that on the Teams page. Your years 2, 3, and 4 are going to be very brief. Realistically, it might even be a guess because we don't know what's going to happen between now and next year. You're not tied to that 4-year plan. Again, remember the self-reflection on the reflection that we talked about last section is that this is kind of an anticipated future. You're not bound to this 4-year plan, meaning that you have to operate off this 4-year plan. The first year of this 4-year plan is your next application. So that will be a lot more detailed, but years 2, 3, and 4, you might pick different programs that you're going to spend money on because you think this is what you want to do as a college. But between now and next May, the world can change. Obviously, we've seen that recently, but you're not tied to that second and third and fourth year. But Charles, you're able to look back on that 4-year plan you all did previously, but you're not bound to that. You're bound now to the 1-year application that you change as things change throughout the year that you get pre-approved. The 4-year plan you do is just that. It's a plan for future application, but you're not bound to it because again, by the time next May rolls around, you will probably have changed that 4-year application, that 4-year plan. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, put something else in the chat and maybe I'll have a side conversation with you. All right, goals for your application. Please, because Shane and I understand this and we swim in this every day, sometimes like when I say words like plan or I talk about application, it jogs a question that's confusing. And Charles, that's why I appreciate you asking the question because I understand it well enough that I'm coming from a reference of someone who does understand it. And so I sometimes will throw out words that maybe should used in a different context. Like I was just talking about your improvement goals, and now I'm talking about your application goals. So those are very obviously 2 different things, obvious to me. So I want to try to make sure they're obvious to you. Before was the performance improvement plan, the performance goals that you have to reflect on. This is your application goals that you're making for this next year. Now, this Excel document that Shane and I have created, it fills in based upon the shaded areas that you see in different colors. But primarily what I want to talk about in this little section is simply the goals. The goals are the overarching area. You are required to have 2 goals. And this is in the actual, we have an application guide that is very beneficial. We basically created this guide so that it can walk you step by step through the entire application if you have never seen Perkins before. And if nothing else, it would make you at least more informed as you're working on each section that you could ask better questions maybe, or help you understand it before you reached out to us. So as you look at this screenshot that you have here, each of those colored sections, again, are very specific to parts of the goals or the application itself. I'm just, for example, you'll see green. That's administration and consumables. So anything that's listed in that particular area is an amount of money, and that will keep a subtotal running of how much you're spending in administration. And just as an FYI, for those who don't know, you can spend up to 5% of your total amount in administration or consumables as long as it's in your application. And you need to be pretty specific about what those will be. For example, if they're welding rods, that would be a consumable. If it's going to be paper, that would be a consumable. You need to make sure you list that specifically within here. All right, but more specifically, we want to talk about goals. Go back to that one if you don't mind. Yeah. Go back to this. Yeah. So in section A there, it says goal settings. You will see that underneath some of those words, you'll see in blue, you'll see also to the left, page 4. Page 4 is the guide page. I mean, I think we did an excellent job here making sure we even point you to the page number that you need to go to in the guide to get more information. So while to the right where it says blue, it says completion, credential, graduation, non-traditional, and placement. Those are summaries of what each of those are defined on page 4. So what accountability focus areas will be addressed in the SMART goal? That is what has to be included. So there is a longer description of your goal and what has to be a part of that than maybe you would think about, but that's outlined very clearly in the guide, and it's based strictly on the legislation. Again, nothing that Shane and I just thought would be cool to put in there for the college, but specifically what had to be in there. So these are required components in each of these colored words. The green, careers, PD, professional development, skills, academic, program of study, PLS, or CLNA. Those are well defined in pages 6 through 9. That's how you're going to use the funds. You have to make sure to include how those funds are going to be used, which of those areas those funds are going to be utilized in. So please, if you don't have that guide, it's available in our Teams page. Again, if you don't have access to that, please email Shana or I, and we'll make sure you get access to that Teams page where all these documents are located. All right, Shana, you can go ahead and spin forward a couple.
Yeah, and the email I sent this morning had the basic grant application guide, which kind of explains all those different acronyms in colors. So it would be very helpful to maybe pull that up and look through that as maybe even in the meeting, but definitely as you're completing the application.
Yes, and again, as Shana mentioned, that if things go well this afternoon, you'll have time to actually work on that. For those who this will be new for you, we will be available to work through that with you. So you'll want to have all of those kind of documents ready for you. I'm not going to read through this. I want you to see it though. Your goals, the 2 required goals, have to be SMART goals. So in the past in Perkins, goals have been somewhat vague and not even measurable, so that when you do the reflection the following year, it was difficult to assess whether the goal was attained or not. So your goal has to be a SMART goal. You see what that means on the screen. If you have questions about that when you go through that process, please email us or call us. We'll talk you through. And here's an example of a goal that you see circled on the screen. We've had some colleges that the individual would call us, and maybe they wouldn't say, they would just say, we're going to increase our employability skills this year. Well, that's not measurable. I mean, it says you're going to increase them, but increase them from what to what? So some of those adaptations to your goal we can help give you. We won't recommend, I shouldn't say won't recommend, we won't require that you make an improvement from X to Y. We'll give you a recommendation or an example, but that improvement, I come from the side of, again, trying to make flexibility for the college. So when I read the legislation and it says improvement, that simply means going up. So that doesn't mean 10%, doesn't mean 5%, doesn't mean 50%. But a college may be ambitious because they're putting a lot of money into this particular area, and so they want to see it raised by 20%, or they think that it's going to go up that high simply because of the money they're putting in there. I'll give you a real quick example. We had one college on the nursing state boards that didn't do so well the year before. So the next year they were wanting to have they were going to pay for somebody to come in and actually teach the soon-to-be nurses or graduate students or students who were going to graduate from the nursing program, and they were going to do a 3-day seminar to prepare them for the nursing boards. And they were very confident they were going to increase by 25%. They actually thought 50%, but they decided to put 25%, and they knocked it out of the park, and every one of their students passed their nursing state boards for the first time in a long time. And so that was an example where they were more ambitious than they had to be, but it was something that they wanted to do. The accountability areas. So again, you have to have one of the goals must connect, or excuse me, both goals have to connect to the CLNA. You can have more than 2 goals if you choose, but you have to have a minimum of 2. And one of those goals has to focus on one of the following accountability areas. And I'm not going to read those to you, but you can see those quite clearly. Most goals will actually focus on both. We'll have 2 of those. But your second goal can focus on any element that was previously listed or something else that comes out of your comprehensive local needs assessment. So go back one more again, Shana. So one goal, which is typically goal 1, must be one of these 4. And then your second goal can be a continuation of one of these, or a continuation of the first goal, or anything else that's pulled out of your CLNAs. So that gives a lot of flexibility. And then we have several colleges that have more than 2 goals. So that's not a requirement that it's only 2 goals. And then, of course, got to be based on data. So your accountability focus areas, yeah, you saw that. Okay, good. So this goes back to that section I was talking about earlier. You see, it tells you what page to go to. And this is what you look when you look inside the guide. This is that page specifically spelling out completion, credential, and graduation, and what those terms actually mean and what that needs to, and how that's relied upon within the actual application itself. Again, more detail. This is in the guide. based upon going to that page that was mentioned earlier, and you can see the definition of each of those and what the word placement, what that actually means, and you can see the detail of that that you saw just the word placement in the actual application itself earlier. Go ahead. So looking at this particular section, so this is the components that have to be included. Notice they're in purple. So when you go to the guide, I think we do on the next screen, right? It's in purple. So the careers, here's the definition for what that is: POS, EPSO, as we talk these, as we sound out our acronyms, GAPS, recruit, and what those definitions are. Special POPs, go ahead. And WBL, go ahead. So just a reminder on your funds, make sure that they're referenced in your local application goal sheets, and make sure that has to do with your STLOPs, state determined levels of performance. Sometimes they're called state determined performance levels, but nonetheless. But it can only be spent in your approved CTE courses, CTE programs, and that have completed their CLNA. Again, if a program doesn't complete the CLNA process, then they cannot get Perkins funding for that year. They are eligible as soon as they do their next CLNA, which can be important. So just remember that. How will the funds be used? This is the green section, pages 7 through 10. Here's the definitions of that. Go ahead, Shana. Make sure to open up your guide if you really want to read through that. Professional development activities must be provided, must be, not just for one of these, your PD activities. Now, before we move on any further, you don't have to spend Perkins dollars for professional development, right? Every one of your colleges at the beginning of the semester or the beginning of the trimester, at the very beginning of each year, there is usually some type of professional development. TCATs have a whole week that they do in the spring. Professional development activities are ongoing. Those may be spent through other types of funds. And so you can check those boxes off in your Perkins application, even though they weren't spent with Perkins dollars. So your college must be providing activities for professional development for the instructors. Now, if that's done through other dollars besides Perkins, that's fine. But if they're not, then you'll have to check that list off here with Perkins dollars. So where it gets tricky is when you start talking about high school instructors. Is that on the next page or next slide, Shannon? No, it's not. But anyway, some of the, yeah. So some of that, yeah, that's right. So some of this has to do with working with high school instructors or high school career counselors. So most of you all do that naturally anyway. You try to work with your feeder or your feeder schools, which are your secondaries, and you try to provide some type of summer professional development. If you do that even without Perkins dollars, that counts. But you must include each of these. Your college must be doing each of these to get Perkins dollars. So whether you utilize your state dollars or you utilize your Perkins dollars, you have to check these boxes off and make sure that they're all being done. So this is an action step. Go back one real quick, Shannon. So this is a completed section, section B. So we can't scroll up because this is a slide, but action step number 1, it says, because of whatever the goal was, here's what we're actually going to do. Based upon the CLNA, we're going to select instructors who will participate in local externships with industry partners to familiarize themselves with new industry technology and trends. So this is an action step based upon the previous goal. And if I remember right, we read that together about increasing something from 73% to 83%. So this is an actual action step. Now, you could have 10, you could have 20 action steps. There's not a requirement of you have to have a minimum of 1 action step to accomplish a goal. But then this is the sections of how you do that. So in this particular section, we've got highlighted professional development, and it makes sure that those instructors are going to attend a training, right? But you also have to make sure that not within these funds, but that the college is also providing professional development in all the other areas that were listed within the guide as well. It doesn't have to be done through Perkins, and it doesn't have to be done through this action step. But within this action step, how is that professional development going to be done? So I know this will open up a lot of questions, especially if this is going to be your first Perkins application that you're going to do, and it's okay. If it's not your first Perkins application, there's probably some confusion at a minimum, and that's okay. If you have questions and you want to be brave enough to go off mute and ask it out loud, please do so. If you'd like to go ahead and put it in the chat, feel free to do that. Or you can simply set a time aside and send us an email, and we'd be happy to answer that. But realistically, these things work a lot better because you can save other people confusion that you might be having by asking the question. And that's usually beneficial for everyone simply because that helps us focus to answer your question very specifically to what your question is, as opposed to kind of this real general overview that we try to do as we go through this process. So I'll watch the chat in case there's anyone that wants to type in a question while Shayna moves on.
Okay. Why don't we take maybe like a 10 to 15 minute break? We had planned one for 9:15 and we went just a few minutes over. Would that be okay with you, Michael?
Yeah, and by the way, when you mention times, you're talking about Central Time. So
yes, Central Time.
Or Eastern Time, folks think we're an hour late on our break, and that's not the case. But yeah.
Right, Central Time. Why don't we take a break and get back together at let's say 9:35. That gives us about 12, 13 minutes. And if you want to stick around and ask questions, you can. But if you need to take a quick break, we'll get back together at 9:35.
Judy, we meet with high school leaders and faculty to align local dual credit. We meet at least once a month. Does that count as professional development? Yes, absolutely it does, Judy. Great question. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be annually. It can be anytime that you meet. If you do it on a regular basis, that absolutely can count. I'm going to put that in the chat for those who've stepped away. Good question, Judy. Thank you.
Because of Perkins, I've started working with HR and our professional development trainers to get the numbers for the AAS faculty, because I'm supposed to be giving numbers for AAS faculty.
Correct.
I'm not supposed to be giving you the number of people who were trained all over the campus. It's just
correct. Those that apply for, those are specific to Perkins, so they're CTE folks. So yeah, if you're what is the teaching? Is it AT? What is that? You all have teaching there?
What do you mean? What kind of training we're doing?
No. The program. For those who are going to be teachers, it's a different degree.
Yes, the AST.
AST. So that actually is eligible as well, as long as it's in a CTE related field. So there are some few examples outside of the AASs, but yes, the short answer is yes, you are correct. You don't have to worry about all the gen eds and all that kind of stuff. But as long as that professional development, but there will be several of those trainings that are lumped in for all teachers, and you can count that for your list as well.
So we're doing some work with UT and the local high schools for that AST, and I wasn't going to count that, so thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And your most of your ASs will well, some of those that are any vaguely related to CTE can be counted as well if you'd like. Obviously, you don't have to include that, but you could.
Okay. I'll have to take a look at that. Some of them are kind of faded into the background, but
yeah,
the work with the K through 5 is big.
Yeah.
It's big right now. So
Sure.
I will do that.
Okay,
and,
thanks, Judy. Take you a break. Go get you a drink or something.
Well, I'm just joining you because we had a big meeting with the VP this morning on promotion and tenure, and I couldn't miss it. Shayna, I will do the recording. So Pellissippi State has not been in this meeting for the last hour and 15 minutes, but I'll go back and look. And did you send us your PowerPoint?
I haven't sent the PowerPoint yet. I will send it out after the meeting, but you should have the grant application template and the guide. The guide is going to be very helpful.
Okay. And I was worried, it's Perkins, so I was worried, like, is this going to be a 200-page guide? And the first thing I did was scroll down to see.
Yeah.
It's 18
That's
pages.
a fair assumption too, Judy, so that's understandable.
You know, Perkins does good things, and then sometimes it's a little much, but
of course.
So okay, and I have Danette. So although it's my first one, I have Danette, and she's amazing.
She's awesome. Yeah.
All right.
Fortunate to have her.
Yes, I know. I keep thinking she's going to leave. I'm going to do this without her next year. Oh God! And I ask her, please don't leave until I do. at least 1 year because she catches me every time. She's just catches me. And if I call her, she's there. I'm like, what is this?
Yes,
So yeah,
exactly.
she talks me down. So
That's great.
Let us know if we can help you, Judy.
thank you. Thanks for entertaining my questions.
Absolutely, anytime.
Okay, welcome back everyone. It is 9:35 Central Time, so I hope you enjoyed your break. We will continue on with working our way through technical assistance for the basic grant application, and we are still planning to have lunch from 11:30 to 12:30 Central Time, so that's 12:30 to 1:30 Eastern Time. Just a reminder that our plan is to allow you the afternoon session to have time for local level work to begin working on your basic grant application, as long as we can make it through the rest of our agenda items by lunchtime at 11:30. As we move forward in the next section, I do just want to emphasize again, I know I've said this multiple times, enough. The basic grant application guide that I sent by email this morning, and it's also located on the Perkins Microsoft team under files. That guide is going to be so helpful to you, especially to our newer Perkins coordinators. You're going to want to use that guide as you complete your basic grant application over the next couple of months. So please refer to that. We did record a technical assistance video last year for the application, and I can repost that in Teams. I haven't updated it since last year, so the two new pieces, the descriptive application and the state determined levels of performance, are not included in that video, but you have everything else. So you're welcome to review that as well if you prefer to learn from a video rather than reading a guide. Okay, let's move into section B of the grant application. This is still on the goals worksheet. So Michael's covered section A, which is goal setting. Section B are action steps and implementation plan. So how are we going to accomplish the goals that we've set out to achieve? So what activities are you going to include that are going to help you reach your goal? This is where you outline those activities in the action steps and implementation plan. So on the template, if you've pulled that up to look at it, we've listed, I believe we've listed 4 goals. No, we've listed 3 goals. So 3 separate goal worksheets. And then under each goal, we've listed 4 different action steps. So you're only required to have 1 action step for a goal, but many colleges choose to have multiple action steps for a goal in order to be very specific in what they're planning to accomplish using Perkins funds. So you're welcome, even though we've only included 4 action steps in the template. If you need to just copy and paste and add additional action steps, maybe you need 6 action steps, you're welcome to copy and paste that into the template to accommodate your college's application. So in this section, we're looking at what activities are we planning to participate in to meet the goal? What equipment is going to be purchased based on the goal that we've set? Professional development. What type of professional development will we provide for our educators based on the goal in section A? Action steps should be research-based. They should be descriptive. They should meet all of those required components that you see in the template. So here's a screenshot of what this section looks like. This is a sample that has some sample information listed. So above this, you would see section A, which is for goal setting, which Michael previously covered. And then right under section A, you're going to see section B, and this is for action steps and implementation plan. So we've got the action step, a timeline, an evaluation strategy, professional development, the professional development activity. Again, you see those acronyms there. If you go back to the guide, you'll see what those mean, and you'll have definitions for each one. The expected outcome that we're hoping to achieve as a result of this action step based on our goal. The use of funds, the funding source. Are we using Perkins funds for this specific action step, or is it going to come from another source of funds? And then the line item dollar amount would be listed there as well if we're using Perkins funds. So the timeline, we would like for you to be specific. So don't just list, July 1st through June 30th. Be more specific if possible on your action step timeline. Some action steps, if you're paying for the salary of an instructor, okay, that makes sense to list July 1st through June 30th. But other action steps will be more specific in the timeline. Evaluation strategy. So evaluation should take place during the timeline, the action step timeline. Many of these action steps will need to be evaluated frequently to make sure that we're on track and making progress toward accomplishing the goal. There are a list of a few questions there. I won't read each one. I will send out this PowerPoint presentation after the meeting and I'll post it in Teams. So if there's anything that you want to go back to and review, you will have this available to you. Professional development audience. So in Perkins 5, there are no longer professional development components. Instead, identify the audience of the professional development. And again, there's a reference to go back to the local application guide, which I've mentioned so many times, and it explains who those different professional development audiences and the different guidelines. It explains with definitions for each of those. So you'll see that referenced in section A of goal setting, and you see it referenced in section B of the action steps and the implementation plan. The expected outcome. So if your action steps go as you've planned, what will be the outcome? What does success look like if we accomplish this action step? Same thing for professional development. If it goes as planned, what will the outcome be? Use of funds. This was also mentioned in section A of goal setting, and then it's listed again in section B for the action steps and the implementation plan. Line items for Perkins. There are 5 line items: administrative, salary, equipment, professional development, and Skills USA. And when you open up the template, someone is not muted. I'm not sure who that is since I'm sharing my screen. Michael, you may be able to mute them if you can see who it is. Somebody is dialing a phone and we can hear you. Okay. Those line items will be color coded in the template. So when you open that up, you'll be able to see specifically each line item that is color coded. And whenever you enter in those dollar amounts, it's set up so that it should automatically transfer over to your budget page, which is towards the end of the application. But always double check that and make sure that your dollar amounts that are listed in your action steps do transfer over correctly to your budget page. And that's kind of just reinforcing what I just mentioned. Indicate the amount of Perkins funds that will be used. If no Perkins funds are going to be used for a specific action step, you can enter 0 for that. Questions on section B of the goals worksheet, the action steps and implementation plan. You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask verbally, or if you prefer to type questions in the chat, you're welcome to do that as well. I'll move on for now. So under section B, there is one more section of the goals worksheet. Section C is the equipment list. So this is a listing of equipment that you are planning to purchase with Perkins funds. And it should be directly related from your goal and your action step. So this will be at the bottom of the worksheet. The purpose for section C is to list the equipment by the career cluster, the program of study, and the campus for which the equipment will be purchased. I said career cluster, but that's not listed. It's program of study. So you're going to list the action steps. So let's say in action step number 2 under this goal, we wanted to purchase PLC trainers. So we're listing that here. Action step 2, it's going to the advanced manufacturing program of study. The instructor is Michael Tinsley. It's going to the Nashville campus and the specific equipment that's being purchased. So we do ask that you be as specific as possible. You know, writing just the word computers is not acceptable, but if you can make it more specific, 15 Dell laptop computers would be a much better choice for this section. Again, this is not the ongoing equipment list. This is only equipment that you are requesting to purchase under this goal, under one of these action steps on this sheet. And you'll see this section repeated for each goal. You know, you may only be purchasing equipment for goal number 1, and goal number 2 and 3, this section may be blank. Some of our TCATs don't purchase any equipment and they use all of their Perkins funds for salary. So section C would just be blank on each worksheet. The budget here is a sample of the budget sheet. If you notice, it is color coordinated and those colors go back to the goals worksheets. So as you add in dollar amounts for administrative expenses, equipment, professional development, salaries, and Skills USA, if you're entering them in the appropriate cell in the goals worksheet, it should automatically populate onto this budget worksheet. But again, please always double check it. Double check the math and make sure everything is calculating correctly. Please make sure that you list your total allocation and then don't allocate any more than your total allocation without, you know, pre-approval. I'm going to go back to that for just a moment. Whenever we review your basic grant applications, we will add an electronic signature that we have approved it and the date that it is substantially approved. We will list any comments there if necessary, and we will send that back to you so you have it for your records. Like I mentioned earlier, we will likely substantially approve your application at the TBR level before we receive the grant award notification from Tennessee Department of Education. It might just, you know, be a miracle if we get those at the same time, but you will have the substantially approved budget and application. And if your college chooses to go ahead and allocate Perkins funds before you receive the grant award notification, like Michael mentioned earlier, that is allowable if your college chooses to do so. And then the last page, the last tab of the application is the assurances and approvals page. Michael, do you want to mention anything about this page?
Yeah, let me say a little bit about this. Again, I don't know if you're wondering if you've ever read through this. I don't know why you would read through it, but I mean, it would make sense that somebody at the college should read through it. Your president has to sign off on it. If you have a CFO, they need to sign off on it as well. Basically, this is, again, pulled directly out of legislation. There's nothing in here that, again, Shane or I thought would just be good to add in here. These are requirements that make sure that the president and or CFO are understanding of that this application is basically going to make sure that those funds are spent according to the application and following all other federal rules and laws, laws and legislative procedures. So that's what this particular assurance and approvals are. I do want to backstep, go back, not a slide, but just a comment. Perkins 5 has been approved at least for the next 2 more years, maybe 3 years. I have to look back at the legislation on the end date. I think it's through June 30th of 23. Those funds are already guaranteed. So we know that we're going to continue to get those for the next 2 fiscal years without question. So even though we won't get the GAN sometimes until late, the U.S. Department of Education on July 1 does send that out every July 1, and our Tennessee Department of Education gets that on July 1. Now, the only time, and so if you're hearing in part of the discussion or part of the things that Shane and I have been saying earlier is that sometimes the GANs don't come till November, December, and so that may be of concern. During the actual term of the legislation for Perkins 5, which is for the next at least 2 years, those dollars have already been approved by Congress. So those funds are coming to us. We have an MOU with the Tennessee Department of Education. We actually know that for the next 2 years, those funds are guaranteed. So that should be, to term the word again, or use the word again, assurance that your college is going to get those funds for the next 2 years, as long as you apply for the funds and you complete all those reports that are done. So as long as you complete everything that Shane and I try to make sure that you do utilize, which is a requirement of continuing those funds are guaranteed. So there's not a concern of Congress approving those funds or pulling them away. Now, once Perkins 5 officially ends, Congress will have to pass a continuing resolution. The acronym for that is a CR. It's an abbreviation. So at that point, when Perkins 5 is over, then Congress will have to pass a continuing resolution to give more Perkins dollars to the states. Usually that happens, by the way, the congressional fiscal year starts October 1. So usually they get that done sometime in the early fall, like August or summer, August into September. They usually will pass the budget for the next fiscal year. And I usually, when that's going on after the Perkins legislative window closes, then we are dependent upon that year-by-year approval for a continuing resolution from Congress. I usually keep you all updated on that through emails to let you all know, hey, Congress has just passed this, so our money is guaranteed, or okay, it's September 1st or excuse me, October 1st, and they haven't passed that continuing resolution yet. So that I can give you a preview of, well, it looks like they're going to pass it in the next couple of weeks. I usually give you all those updates. Now, that is the only time that we're unsure that your dollars are going to be giving, that are going to be filtered down. It's never not happened in over 100 years, but there is a possibility if Congress hasn't passed it. But again, when that is actually a concern, I continually email the campuses and give updates, because I'll usually have somebody who will personally text me and ask me, hey, what's going on with Congress? And since Perkins now has now on a year-by-year basis. So I have been in the past and will continue to be very sharing information with you on a regular basis in that case. But we know for the next 2 fiscal years, 22 and 23, it's already guaranteed money. So your college doesn't have to worry about that. You just have to go through the process of making sure you complete all these little steps that the legislation requires of us. So as we talk about making sure things get approved and those GANs, those GANs are just the manifestation, the guarantee that you have in writing that shows that you're getting those dollars. But currently we have the actual legislation and the MOU that guarantees those monies for the next 2 years. So that's a good thing. So your college can move forward and we will supply those GANs as we get them, but you're not beholden upon those, because Congress has said within the legislative window that these funds are guaranteed. Even without those GANs, even if they're given to you late, you're already guaranteed those money by Congress. So I hope that clears up a little bit if that's caused some confusion. Also, I want to make sure that folks know that part of the change that we made this last year is to try to release technical assistance videos. We try to keep between 5 and 10 minutes long each time. So, and they are a deeper dive into each topic that is addressed in those areas. And so we got a question this morning from someone who asked, maybe if for those who are new, that maybe we do something on the acronyms. I know in education we tend to do that anyway, but Perkins is as bad or worse as any other area within education. We have a lot of acronyms and a lot of things that maybe a new person would like to know about with Perkins. So that's a video that maybe I'll try to do in the next couple of weeks as well, and release that to the teams. Try to keep it to 10 minutes or less as well, because I know those short snippets of videos are better than anything like sitting through a full day like this. But Shana has been completing some of those videos already, and some of those have been released. She's mentioned one around the application guide, and she's going to update that with the 2 new sections as well. But the idea here is that we have a repertoire of those videos, so that when you can think of a topic that you need to know a little bit more about, you can go grab a 5 to 10 minute video that we've completed, and you can grab that and watch that real quick and try to get the ins and outs of that particular subject. So just a side note on that as well. But this assurances approvals on the initial application that's submitted in May, by the end of May, this must be signed. And remember, this is your application. So the president and or the CFO is signing this, is saying, okay, we're going to spend these dollars in this manner that's in this application. At any time throughout the year that you update that application, it is taken for granted that you have already went through the process on your college campus and worked through your president or CFO and made sure that those folks are aware of the change that you're making in the way those dollars are being spent moving forward. But on the front end in May, when you turn this in, this has to be signed by your college president and to include your CFO if you have one. And then we go through a checklist outside of the assurances and approvals. Shane, if you can move that forward.
Yeah, for some reason it's not going.
And then if you can watch the chat. So this is kind of the checklist of what a campus has to do once you're ready to turn your application in next month. There you'll see two slides here, but I want to point down to about the fourth one down, indicate consortium status. There will be very few of our colleges that are part of consortium. TDOE, Tennessee Department of Education, Perkins person at the state level, Steve Plale, he and I have been working together the last 4 or 5 years and trying to encourage our colleges and LEAs to potentially go into consortium status. I think he's even made available extra dollars for any college and LEA that decides to do a consortium together, which could be as little as one high school and one college that decides to combine their Perkins dollars and plan together to give some extra money if there's a consortium based upon that. Consortium status used to be used in the past when we would have multiple colleges going together. We still have some colleges that do that. Most of you all won't be a part of a consortium, so this will be one that you can just skip over. But if you are a part of a consortium, you'll just need to indicate that as well. But you'll see these other check boxes. You can go to the next screen or next slide. And this is the other things that you must make sure to do. The equipment list it's been addressed. There is a master equipment list that has to be kept ongoing for eternity, basically, as the legislation words it, not eternity, but ongoing. Is that all Perkins dollars that have been spent on equipment that needs to be maintained. Even after the equipment is gone, the list will actually say when it was discarded or gotten rid of. And there's always the question of, well, I'm new to the position. We don't have a master equipment list. This is why we're having a requirement that list is turned into us, so that if you as a Perkins coordinator end up leaving sometime this year, that the next person, we can give them the most current equipment list that we have, that the institution has on file that with us. And that equipment list is specific to Perkins. So it won't have all the equipment that you have at your college, but just what's been purchased through Perkins. And that master equipment list, if you go back, if you're new to Perkins, go back, we can provide the handful of years, probably the last 5 to 10 years even, of the applications that have been submitted and what equipment was going to be spent on. And then that could give you a track to start documenting that. But what I always ask when someone says, I don't know where to start with that, start with the current year that you're on, any equipment that was purchased. That is a part of the application that's required under Perkins 5 to put in a equipment list of things that you purchased this year with the actual application you have. And then the goal is to go back a minimum of 3 years total. So the current year and the 2 previous years, that would be the best starting point. And then that's kind of the line in the stand moving forward that you make sure that every year you add to that. And then as you turn those into us on an annual basis, then that will make sure that the college stays out of trouble. We had one college, not in Tennessee, in Texas, that had to repay of $1 million because they hadn't been keeping up with their equipment list. And their state person, I know that person didn't do a really great job of trying to defend that. So what we've done on technical assistance is try to make sure you have a 3-year block of equipment at a minimum that makes it easier for us to defend in case the feds ever come down and try to make folks repay money because there's not an equipment list. Okay, Shane, I think that's the last slide there.
Okay.
And if there's any other questions, you put those in the chat and I'll maintain those and Shayna will move on.
All right, sounds good. Local use of funds, we talked about this a little bit earlier whenever we covered the goals worksheets, but just to highlight one more time, all expenditures in the budget should be referenced in the basic grant local application goal sheets. So it shouldn't be on the budget page and not in a goal or in an action step. In addition, the budget should reflect improvements that you're planning to make from last year. So again, that's going back to that annual improvement summary report and doing a self-reflection of how are we going to improve on previous year's goals. Of course, Perkins funds may only be spent on approved CTE courses and programs of study, and all expenditures must be pre-approved. Once again, we've mentioned this before, but if you see that changes need to be made to your application throughout the year, you just need to request in writing. So by email is fine. Send an email to Michael and me and let us know how you're thinking of revising the application, and we will review it and let you know about approval status before you update your application and make those purchases. We've already talked about the line items. I think I doubled some of this in here, but I did want to mention, going back to that guide one more time, what can we use our Perkins funds on? In the application guide, you will see a listing of the local uses of funds that are approved under the Perkins 5 legislation. So it's broken down into 6 different areas, 6 different main areas, but within each of those 6 areas, if you see the number out beside each line item here, for example, provide career exploration and career development activities, there are 6 different, I guess, items under that one higher level use of funds. Provide professional development for educators. There are 9 things listed. And again, you can see the full listing of these in the guide. Provide the skills necessary to pursue high skill, high wage, or in-demand occupations. Support the integration of academics into CTE. Number 5 has 20 different sub-items for this one. Support implementation of program elements resulting in increased student achievement. And you can see each one of those sub-items in the Basic Grant Application Guide. Again, if you would like to ask a question verbally, you're welcome to come off mute now, or you can type questions into the chat, and we will continue to monitor the chat.
All right, the 4-year application. So this is another new requirement within Perkins 5. Previous to the question earlier in the day talked about doing a 4-year plan in the past, and that had to do was different than what is in Perkins 5. Perkins 5 basically has to make sure, or the legislation within Perkins 5 ensures that your college is forward thinking. Again, what we've created is a template based upon the legislation and makes it relatively easy to make sure you can be able to go through this. Notice again on the screen, this is just a screenshot. And this one page, this template is pretty simple. There's 4 areas that you want to tackle, or 4 sentences at a minimum that you're going to put. Your first year, your fiscal year, the first year that you're going to be listing here is going to be the actual next fiscal year that you're applying for. So in this case that we're talking about today, go ahead and go back one. We'll come back to more of the details in a second. But in this case, you're going to be looking at the 21-22, or what we call the fiscal year 22 application. This is going to be your year 1 in your 4-year plan. And so each year you can see how this is dramatically going to change. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And this is where your detail is going to be for your 4-year plan, because it's still a summary of what your application is, but you're going to list how you plan on spending those funds. Now, this first year is only, it doesn't bind you, but it should be accurate compared to what's in your application, because this is a summary of your application for the next year. And you're doing this in a time that is relevant because it's while you're doing your application. So if you know you're going to spend $22,500 on welding, on welders next year, you're already putting that in your application. And so you're going to put it here in your 4-year plan as well. Now, what I want your eyes to draw near to is the bottom 3 areas that are in bold: Perkins year 2 of 4, Perkins year 3 of 4, and Perkins year 4 of 4. Notice those are only 1 or 2 sentences each. This is a guess of your planning for what's going to be happening over the next 3 years beyond the next current fiscal year. You're not beholden to those 4 years those additional 3 years beyond the next fiscal year. Those are what you anticipate are your plans as a college, but they will change, much like your current year application has changed for most all of you. That's okay. Again, the legislation is specific that there needs to be some self-reflection for the college of what their plans are in utilizing Perkins dollars. But know for a fact that more than likely it's going to change. Again, this year's application has changed multiple times for some of the colleges. It's part of the process. It's not a problem. It is time consuming. I'm not going to lie to you on that. But there is a reason to the madness within the legislation. So this is a requirement. You have to have this 4-year application. We've tried to put it into a succinct way for you to fill that out. This is not even a recommended one. This is an actual sample 4-year application that was filled out. There is not so much a right and wrong way to do it. As long as you have those components in there, then you're going to be fine. You see the sample is a simple page that was just typed up. But the detail would make more sense that it's on in the next year that you are currently applying for. Years 2 through 4, a simple sentence that maybe 2 sentences. You can have it longer if you'd like, but I wanted to make sure that you all saw a sample that is realistic of what you should be including. Okay. If for some reason there was an issue with yours, Shane or I would reach back out to you and say, hey, there's not enough detail here in your application. You didn't mention the welders that you were going to purchase, and that's in your application for next year. Oh, and you forgot to put year 3 in there for some reason. What's your all's plan for spending the dollars? You know, you see the specificity. If you zoom in, maybe you see the specificity that's or lack of specificity, but just enough to make sense of what you are planning to do. Again, you're not beholden to that, because next year, that year 2 will be moved up to the next year, and it'll be a lot more expanded, and it'll be different, and there'll be different details. Even it could be a different program that the funds are utilized with. So there will be some changes to that, but don't get hung up on the 4-year application process. It's just a small part of the planning process for Perkins moving forward for the college, and that's the intention of it from legislation. Go ahead, Shannon. All right, so each year we have a reserve grant that is available. Now, each of the last 2 years, we have had this reserve grant focused on industry certifications. I will say that the goal from this, and I've said this openly, and I've had this goal for several years, is I would love to see built in to the structure of student fees, for example, that industry certification exams will be paid for through the college. That would be my ultimate goal. Now, obviously, none of the programs have the funding to then pay for those industry exams, and it's difficult to say, hey, students, you may be on Pell grants, so you by definition can't afford the industry certification exams. But if we build that into, say, an overall student fee, then that may be something that through Tennessee Promise or through Pell grants anyway, that those can be paid for. That's the longer term goal, is that those exam fees are paid for. But what we have to do is we have to show a real need for the industry certifications. If you are in a particular program field as an instructor or as an administrator, if you've been in a particular area in the past, you understand that those industry certifications are of utter importance to business and industries, in particular to most all fields, as a matter of fact. And one of those, nursing, right? So the nursing boards are a requirement. Now there's been some change in the legislature in Tennessee that helps pay for those, but there are still other fees associated with that exam. But it's a requirement for a student to go to work as an RN or as in other fields, that they have to pass industry certifications. And this state boards for nursing is one of those requirements. They can't go as a nurse and work in the state of Tennessee unless they pass that state nursing board exam. And so in that example, if the state of Tennessee already wasn't paying for it, or because there are other fees that are associated with that board exam, that is a possibility that we could pay for through Perkins. And that we have made this available to all 40 colleges for the last 2 years. And Shayna, I'm looking for a nod or a shake. I think that we've had less than half of the colleges actually each year that have actually accepted that. Does that sound about right? It's half or less. Yeah. So we have about 20 colleges out of the 40 that for whatever reason, only half of you all are accepting free money to pay for industry certification exams. I don't understand that. I don't know what to say to that. I don't understand it. So I do want to talk about that a little bit. So in the research, so here's what you have. We set money aside so that every college can get it. Now it's a limited amount of money simply because we have a limited amount of funds. But as we've had in the past, since only half of the colleges have applied for the funds in the past, that pot has now grown. So we've been able to increase that amount. And Shana, help me remember, is this year $15,000?
I believe that's what you said. Last year was 10,000.
Yeah, so it's increased from 5 to 10 to 15. So I'm going to talk about some specifics as we go along in this particular process. But basically, if you complete the reserve grant for industry certification, then you can get approved for your college to get those funds by just following the process. All right. So some of the specifics here are the 1 through 5, and some of this they're tied because of the way that Perkins dollars can be spent. You can't go and purchase. I'm going to give you some can'ts, C-A-N-T apostrophe T. You can't go and buy a industry certification exam for Billy or Juanica. You can't go buy that for those particular 2 students. But what you can do is you can buy 20 or 25 for the automotive program, and those students happen to be in that automotive program. Now, if those are the only 2 students in the program and the bulk purchase is 20 exams, then you buy the 20 exams for the program, because Perkins is very specific. You can't buy it for an individual, you can buy it for the program, and these have to be purchased in bulk. So if you go to the website or you talk to the person who sells them for the particular industry certification, and they say they bought in bundles of 20. Well, then you only have 2 students in that program. That's okay. You buy 20 for the program. Those are available for the program to use. If there is, that's something to have a conversation with the person who's selling that. Do those expire? That needs to be known up front, because if they expire in 2 years, then that's another decision that the program has to make. But needless to say, you can't buy a certification exam for a single person, but you buy them in bulk for the program. All right. So I hope that helps a little bit with some questions. The second thing I want to address in this is that if your college is deciding that, let's say that because the amount in the first year was only $5,000, that is a very small amount. Some of these exams are several $100s, and you might have 20 or more students in a program after 1 semester or 1 trimester, much less an entire year. And so $5,000 wasn't enough to pay for all the students in one program. Well, the commitment on the front end had to be that even if Perkins dollars was not enough, that the college would fill the gap, because I did not, this is a personal Michael thing. I did not want you to provide, because I'm concerned about the reimbursement if you all having to pay them back is why. So let me explain this. When we were giving out $5,000, and this is going to be relevant also when you think of the $15,000, because that's going to usually cross into multiple program areas. At some point, the $15,000 that's available is not going to cover all the students in a particular program. That is a requirement of this grant. You have to cover the industry certification exam for all the students that could be available in that fiscal year. So let me give you an example. So I'm going to make up numbers, and these are going to be inaccurate numbers, but it's just an example, remember. So there's a $100 industry certification exam at by the end of this particular program, CTE program. And for whatever reason, this particular exam in itself is $100 each. So the quick math on that is $10,000. So this is a $15,000 grant that's going to be made available for this coming year. And so you would do the math, you got $5,000 extra. Okay, so you said that covers that, no problem. But now I'm going to go over here to the second CTE program, and it's a very similar situation. They have 100 students that you typically get through the program, and theirs is $100 each. That's another $10,000. Well, this grant from Perkins is only $15,000 total. So that means that there's $20,000 in these 2 programs, and you have to guarantee you're going to cover all of those students in both those programs for that fiscal year to purchase those exams. Now, that means there's $5,000 you have to find on your own as a college. I will tell you that you could utilize your Perkins Basic dollars to cover that. So that's allowable, but then you just have to put that in your application for the grant, or change your application for your basic grant to come up with those dollars, or the college could decide somewhere else to get those $5,000. So the key here is that you're going to buy enough of the certification exams that will cover every student in each of the CTE programs that you're going to cover. Now, there is no requirement of which programs that you utilize for these industry certifications. I will say on the front end that in the initial design of this reserve grant several years ago, I wanted to set which programs it was going to be. And then I decided that that's not good, because if I wanted to build a case that this is needed across the state for all students, then I need every college to decide what's best for their particular college. And so while automotive may be the best one that you want to tackle at your college, in another college, it might be nursing. In another college, it might be welding. In another college, it might be the business program. And guess what? If we have over 3 to 4 years of information from 20 different programs, then maybe we can make a case for 20 different programs to get the funding added into the student fees that would support all of those programs, instead of just 1 or 2 programs that I might have decided were best. So
there are a couple of
sure.
points in the chat and some questions related to supplanting. Judy at Pellissippi says, we're not asking for reserve dollars for certification exams because of the supplanting issue. And then Amy is asking, is this subject to the 3-year rule, which I think she's referring back to supplanting on that as well. So could you explain to us, if a college, has been purchasing Microsoft Office Specialist exams with other funds in the past, is there any way for them to transition to Perkins funds, or is that not allowable?
So the short answer is yes, it's allowable, and we have to talk about nuances there. I'm curious about the 3-year rule. I'm not sure what, I know what the 3-year rule is now. The 3-year rule applies to utilizing Perkins dollars, like for an instructor 3 years in a row, and then beyond that, you have to switch to something else. So particularly with this reserve grant, yes, reserve grants are different in that we typically don't have a reserve grant that's the same for 3 years or more. This is the first time we've done that. So the short answer is no, that doesn't apply. So the discussion may be is if you build it into your basic grant, is that something that could go beyond the 3-year rule? And the short answer would be yes. That would be something that we need to have a conversation about at the state level. When I say that between myself, Shana, and the chancellor, in my mind, I don't think there's a legal issue with that. It would be a matter of us saying that yes, as a state, we're going to allow that moving forward. So let me put that to set. So the 3-year rule can be agreed upon officially. It hasn't yet. That could be circumvented for this particular reason. So I'll put that one to the side. Supplanting is a valid issue and concern. So remember, supplanting applies to state dollars versus federal dollars. So there has been federal dollars utilized for like mouse exams in the past. And if your college has then picked up the cost of that on your own, then that would be supplanting. But the way that can be circumvented is the wrong word because it makes it sound like you're trying to get around it. The way that can be utilized beyond and make sure that you're not supplanting is that as long as the federal dollars kick in at least a full year after the last time they've been purchased with state dollars, then you're okay. So terrible example, August of 2020, your college through their state dollars purchased those exams. As long as you wait until after that same date in 21, then you could utilize Perkins dollars. Unless there is a reason, and this is not difficult to do, is that because of, let's say, the pandemic, or heck, there's some funds out there on the pandemic, the federal dollars there that could be utilized for that, by the way, that a lot of colleges that don't know how to spend their dollars, buying certification exams would be a great way to utilize those HERF dollars, by the way. I got to share that with Jonathan Button. I haven't done that, and Danny as well. But that's another avenue. So it's a 12-month rule within Perkins that you can utilize federal dollars that replace or supplement the state dollars previously. And also because of difficult times, that because of the budgets, the community college, that the colleges or the community or state technical colleges have decided to allocate funds in a different area so that they're not going to be putting money towards those industry certifications, that now the federal dollars can be utilized. So there's a way to explain that away, meaning that those state dollars are having to be utilized somewhere else. So that can be done. So the short answer is yes, you can make it happen. This is just a brief overview of that application process and what it looks like. And then there is a second focus area. So it's industry certification exams, and it's something very similar. It's for your college to become a testing site. And we had we had several colleges actually do this over the last couple of years, but one that became one of the first community colleges to actually have this. I think it was welding. Now I think about it, that was became a welding place for state exams out east. And so if there are additional expenses as a result of that, which might include the instructor getting certified, so that could be another part of the grant itself. So if it's not just the industry certification exams themselves, it's about getting the college to be a place to have those, because it does make sense if you can have your technical or community college be a place for people to go get the industry certification exams. That potentially has makes it easier for your students, number one, but it could be potential and a moneymaker, small moneymaker, to maintain that availability of doing that from those in the community as well. So a different topic, but yes, those are the two areas for the reserve grant. I did know on a previous slide it said 10,000, but this year it is up to 15,000, and we'll make the adjustments in that as well. So no worries there. Is there another slide?
Yeah, question in the chat too. What about paying for certification for staff or faculty? Lynn said, I thought we could just pay for the training, but not the actual certification.
So as it's listed on this particular slide, sometimes the instructor has to be licensed, but that's for them to be a testing site. Now, what I will say is that if the program purchases 20 of them and there is one left in which the instructor can be certified or get the industry certification, that would make sense for the program. And sometimes that goes back to the accrediting body that does that for the program. I will give an example that we had a college that is in automotive, and they had a unique, the instructor was not, had a different certification. It was approvable as far as the accrediting body is concerned, but there was an encouragement for that person to get an additional certification accreditation through another avenue. And so there was an availability for that instructor to do that through Perkins dollars because of the way that the college purchased the exams. So Lynn, you're right. You can't purchase a single one for the instructor, but you could buy a bundle for the program in which the instructor uses one of those. As long as it doesn't pull away from one from a student, let me clarify that. Good question.
Okay, if there are any other questions, please continue to put those in the chat. I'll give just a moment if anyone wants to unmute and ask a question, because that was a lot of information about the reserve grant application. So if anyone would like to unmute and ask a question, you have the opportunity to do that now.
Shana, this is Amy. I just want to clarify and make sure I understood correctly.
Okay.
For the reserve grant, it can be used for certification exams, but if you have to purchase them in bulk and make sure you can purchase enough for the entire group. But if, say, we use it for nursing, that does not necessarily mean that we also have to purchase it for our EMTs and our medical lab students. It's just that one. It's Correct. Okay for it to be just one department.
Correct. And remember, it does not have to be for all students in the program, just for those that would be completing the program that would be eligible to take it. So you could have, 200 students in the whole program, but only 50 of them will be completing this year.
Good question, Amy. Thanks for speaking up, because you may not be the only one who has that question. So thank you. Anyone else? There's a question in the chat from Danny. Can you purchase an NC3 certification kit, which gives you endless certifications?
So the short answer is yes, but you just want to make sure that there's no supplanting done there if you bought those kits in the past and those kind of things. But yes, short answer is yes, just making sure you're not supplanting and the couple other things that you'd have to be worried about. But yes, you can.
Any other questions on the reserve grant before we move on? And I will have the updated reserve grant application out to you very soon. I didn't want to overwhelm you today with adding another application, since the basic grant application is the one that's going to be at the forefront of your mind. But the reserve grant application will be out very soon, and it is not due until the end of June. So basic grant is due May 31st. Reserve grant application is due June 30th. So you have an additional month to prepare and to complete that application. Okay, I will move on. If there are no other questions, again, please feel free to continue to add questions in the chat. But for now, I'll move on to the quarterly reimbursement report. As you know, if you've been around Perkins for a while, this process has changed over the past year. Beginning in July 1st of 2020, we've added some additional steps to the reimbursement process. So we do issue Perkins 5 funding through a reimbursement process for pre-approved expenditures. And those reimbursements may be requested after the close of each quarter. So there are 4 windows throughout the fiscal year where your college may submit a request for reimbursement for Perkins funds. So at the end of the quarter, you have 30 days. That's your reimbursement window or your request window to submit that documentation. I've had a few colleges reach out and ask, hey, we've submitted for reimbursement in the first quarter and the second quarter, and we still haven't seen anything. That sounds about right. I did check with Sharon Boyce in our Office of Business and Finance, and we have not been reimbursed from Tennessee Department of Education for the first or second quarter yet. So hopefully we'll see those soon, but continue to request reimbursement. We're in the window right now in the month of April to request reimbursement for the third quarter. So here is just kind of a table timeline of what those reimbursement windows look like. So for the first quarter, you are able to request reimbursement during the month of October. Keep in mind, if it is, equipment that was purchased, you should have received the equipment and paid the invoice before you request reimbursement from Perkins. Quarter 2, you're able to request reimbursement during the month of January. Quarter 3 has just ended on March 31st, so we're in the window to request reimbursement during the month of April. And then for the fourth quarter, you may request reimbursement during the month of July. Typically, our business and finance office doesn't allow until July 31st. They usually cut it off a week to a week and a half early. So just keep that in mind if you're going to request reimbursement for the fourth quarter, to try to have that in within the first couple of weeks of July. They do allow one additional closeout invoice to be submitted. And Sharon Boyce in finance, she usually sets the deadline around the end of August for that final closeout reimbursement request for Perkins. And there will be more details to come on that as we get closer to that time frame. But that's just kind of a heads up for those who are new to Perkins, or just a refresher for those who have been around for a while. So as a result of audits completed by the Tennessee Comptroller's Office in 2019 and 2020, we have revised the reimbursement process, and we have added a report to accompany the invoice, which basically details the expenses that are being requested for reimbursement. And then I go and I double check your application and make sure that the expenses that you are requesting reimbursement for were actually pre-approved in your grant application. So it's a little bit more of a process for you, more of a process for me, but it's helping to prevent colleges from having to repay Perkins funds that were not pre-approved, as has happened in the past. So let's take a look at both of these worksheets. So At the beginning of the month, I sent an email out to all of our Perkins coordinators, and I also sent it to our business office contacts at your colleges, because the idea is that you would work together. So the business office would work together with the Perkins coordinator to gather the necessary information. So this is the first worksheet in the template. This is the reimbursement invoice. You would list the college's name at the top, the quarter of reimbursement that you're requesting, so first, second, third, or fourth, the fiscal year of reimbursement. In that second column there, you should have listed your TBR approved budget amount that was listed in your GAN, your grant award notification letter, so what your budget was approved for. And then each quarter, you request reimbursement. If you'll notice, basic grant is separate from reserve grant, and we have to keep it that way for accounting purposes. So make sure you take note of that. Also, once you have submitted reimbursement for a quarter, let's say you've submitted reimbursement for the second quarter, you cannot go back and change that in the third quarter. So whatever has happened in the first quarter and the second quarter must remain how it has been listed previously on the invoice. You can add whatever you need to for the third quarter or the fourth quarter, but we just can't go back and change previous quarters. I've had a couple sent back to me from finance saying, hey, these colleges need to adjust this because they've tried to go back and change a previous quarter, and we can't do that. There are a handful of colleges this year, I think about, I want to say 8 or 9 different colleges who applied for and were approved for the Smart Start Skills USA Reserve Grant Carry Forward. That's a long title. So last fiscal year, there was the Smart Start Skills USA Reserve Grant that was issued. And due to the pandemic, there were many colleges who did not spend all of those funds. You know, we didn't have a state conference, and many of your Skills USA expenses were very low or none, and so you didn't spend those funds. So because of the pandemic, we were allowed to carry forward those funds if you applied for it. And those of you who have applied, you know that you're approved, so you know who you are, you know who I'm talking to. Our finance office has asked that for those Skills USA carry forward funds, when you're requesting reimbursement for those, they have asked if you would just add an additional line to this invoice. I know with the original Skills Reserve Grant, you completed a completely separate invoice. But they have now asked if you would just add an additional line, and I know we're already halfway through the year, but if you haven't requested reimbursement for those funds yet for the third or fourth quarter, if you would just add an additional line, and if you need help with this, just send me an email and I can update the template for you and send it back to you. And that's so that she knows how to keep separate your reserve grant and your Skills USA reserve grant. And you can add the line easily in Excel, but again, if you need assistance with that, or if you prefer that I just do it, and I don't mind at all to just revise the template and send it back to you. And again, I'm only talking to about 8 colleges. There aren't too many of you who had that carry forward reserve grant with Skills. So this is the first worksheet. This is the invoice. The second worksheet is the reimbursement report. So this is the part that was added as a result of comptroller's audits. On this worksheet, we're asking that you list the category of expenditure. So was it administrative, equipment, professional development, salaries, Skills USA? If it was from the reserve grant, go ahead and list that there. So you could list reserve grant industry certifications or reserve grant Skills USA. If it is for the reserve grant, you're not going to have a goal number and an action step to list. Those are specific to your basic grant application. So let's say that you spent money on equipment and you're requesting reimbursement for equipment, and it was listed under goal number 1, action step number 2 on your application. This is a way that helps me to be able to go back and trace that back to your approved application to make sure that we're spending funds that were pre-approved. The details of the expenditure for this example here, welding booths for the classroom, the expenditure cost, the quantity, and the total cost that's being requested for reimbursement. At the bottom of each of those columns, there is an explanation of what we're asking for there. And most of you have done this now 3 times, I guess, because we had a trial run at the end of last fiscal year. So I feel like you're getting more confident with this new process. But as always, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or to Michael, and we'll get you the information you need. Are there any questions about the quarterly reimbursement report and how to submit that?
Yeah, I want to say something before we move on past this. Is
Yeah.
that added tab that was in there? Yes, that one. Those details don't only help you. This wasn't something that we just cooked up because we thought this would be a cool thing to add for the colleges to do. The state comptroller's office was very specific in that when they look at the audit starting this year, they want to be able to see the reimbursement, that they can take this screenshot in this example and they can match that to what your application was. And so they know that, okay, great, that was allowable. So it's less about what for Shannon and I making it easier for us. It's what makes it easier so you don't have to reimburse the Perkins because the state comptroller comes back and says, oh, those welding booths were not in your application process. We can try to find that out ahead of time. And if Shana does find out that maybe you had something in there that wasn't in your application, not only would you not get reimbursed, but there wouldn't be a penalty. You would then say, oh, okay, I need to now spend that $1,100 in this example and do something else with that Perkins related so that those funds wouldn't go to waste. So it is only the benefit for you to add this extra step that the comptrollers basically ask us to do so that we can pre-approve those expenditures before reimbursement. Even though we pre-approve them in the application process, sometimes we have a college or two that may actually spend the funds and for some reason, I guess, didn't look back at the application. But this is the back end and to make sure that you can get reimbursed for that. So again, not something that Shane and I just wanted to do. The comptroller's office felt that it was necessary in order to make sure that we are reimbursing for the proper amounts for the proper items.
Yeah, definitely not, because it's extra work for us. Any questions? Next item on the agenda, and we are nearing the end here, are action plans. Michael,
all right, action plans. Now, no college has had to do an action plan, at least for realistically the last 2 years, because we had the first year of Perkins 5, and then we had the last year of Perkins 4. So realistically, none of your colleges had to do this. None of our colleges had to do this for the last 2 years. And so if you've been on board for less than 2 years in Perkins, you have no idea what this is, and that's okay too. So these are just some snapshots of what that is, but the reason for the action plan is simply based upon what legislation requires. If your college specifically does not meet the goal, and when I say the goal, the performance indicator goal. So 1P1, if your college, I'm making up numbers here, if the college goal was 85% on 1P1, and that's for this current year that we're finishing up, and you don't meet 90% of that goal, so 90% of 85, you can subtract 8.5, so do the math, that's 73.5 or 72.5, so 73%. So if your college didn't score 73% on the goal of 75% on the goal of 85, I said that backwards, 77% of the goal, which was actually 85%, then you would have to do an action plan of how and of why you didn't make that goal and what you're going to implement for the next year. So your action plans are required as a part of legislation if you don't make 90% of any of the performance goals that are listed. And there's 3 performance goals that every college has: 1P1, 2P1, and 3P1. If you don't make 90% of the goal that's already been predetermined for 4 years, remember we talked about this early on, the 4-year goals have already been set. If your college doesn't make one of those in 1 year, then you have to create an action plan. Now, these action plans are purposefully set up to be 3-year action plans. Why is that? Because historically, for those who've been around more than a year or two, is that the non-traditional student in a non-traditional program, which would be an example is male in nursing or a female in welding, those numbers and those goals are typically difficult for our colleges to make, or for a lot of our colleges to make, not all of them. And so a one-year plan typically doesn't fix the situation. So if you don't make non-trad goal, which is 3P1 this year, more than likely, unless something dramatic changes, you probably won't make it next year, depending on how much far away you are from making that goal. And so instead of having to do a different plan every year, there is a 3-year action plan. And this, just like your 4-year application, there will be some broad aspects to your 3-year plan, but there will be some very specific goals from 1 year to the next, like say going from this year to next year once you realize you did or did not make your performance goals. So I say all that to say this: don't get over worried about this plan right now. It is not that complicated of a plan. It is something that Shane and I will be happy to work with you if you don't make your performance goal. And oh, by the way, how do you know when you don't make your performance goal? It's when we do all of this data in the near term, November and December. So we just did these we got your performance reports in December that had to go to the U.S. Department of Education, and those indicate whether you made your goals in the first year, which was basically the baseline year. And so by getting those goals up front, you now know that looking forward to this coming December, when you get the first complete year of the second year of Perkins, that you should be making those goals. And if you noticed on one of your goals, 1P1, 2P1, or 3P1 that you didn't make, hopefully you've been making changes this year with the way you're allocating Perkins dollars, or you're not you allocating, but maybe the college is allocating or putting a better emphasis on the way they're spending their dollars to make sure that those goals are reached, because those are requirements. There could be a requirement after a couple of years if you still are not maintaining or getting the performance goals met, and that would be starting out about 10% of your Perkins dollars would go towards that within your 3-year action plan. 3-year action plan, it could be maybe after the second year if it's not met, then at the 3rd year you're going to start applying Perkins dollars specifically to it, especially if you haven't done it previous to that time. And that would be, again, some of this we can work through. It is a very basic plan, but there's some of that where folks will get together and kind of meet and discuss and see how we can raise that number up. Maybe it's one program that's doing really poorly, compared to all the other programs, and then the focus needs to be in that particular program. So there's a lot of dynamics here to make sure you're doing this effectively, and Shane and I will be happy to work with you once December comes around and we know your new how your performance has been. We will keep a record up here at our office of how you've been doing on your performance indicators year by year. And Shayna, she probably already has a compilation of all of the colleges and how you did on your performance indicators this past December and what those are, and possibly how far you are off from meeting your goal for this next December. And some of you all may have met them all this last year. And so that's great. But you don't obviously want to take focus away from doing those, because the action plan is an additional step that you don't want to have to complete, and hopefully those measures are being met. Shana, anything else on that? Any questions on the action plan? Nobody's had to fill one out for a couple of years. If you do, this probably, when we'll know in December, right? So if we have 3 or 4 colleges or 20 colleges that don't make one of the indicators, then that's going to be a technical assistance that we try to do pretty quickly to make sure all of you guys and ladies can make sure you complete your action plan. So this is just an FYI moving forward, that if you've got your data from December, I would glance over that, because if you didn't make 90% of one of those goals, then you would, in a normal year and moving forward, you would have to do a 3-year action plan. If you did not make your goal in December, this past year in 2020, December 2020, you do not have to do an action plan. Let's be clear. But in December of 21, when those percentages come back and that data is done by our folks and Chris Tingle, if you don't make an indicator, you will have to do a 3-year action plan that will turn around. And I think it's due in January, Shana, or do you have the date?
January.
January.
Yes.
Okay. So this is just a feather in your cap to be thinking about. Don't, when we get to December, I would look back on your December numbers from this last year just so you have a good idea of see where you're at. And if you didn't make all 3 of your indicators, then oh man, I'm probably going to have to do an action plan. And the better off you are is that if you can avoid having to do that by trying to make sure those numbers are corrected. So that's the action plan.
Okay. All right. Uniform Grant Guidance Report. This was due in February, so most all of you have already completed this, so this is kind of just a recap. And for anyone new moving forward, the Uniform Grant Guidance Performance Report is due by the end of February. You will use the data collected from the Consolidated Annual Report, the CAR, in December. You will need your CAR to be able to fill out this information. And you're basically looking at each of the performance indicators, 1P1, 2P1, 3P1, and you're looking at what was the objective for the year and what was our accomplishment. So did we meet our goal? On the Consolidated Annual Report, we look at 90% of the goal. However, with the UGG, the Uniform Grant Guidance Report, we look at the full goal, so the full 100% of the goal. So if the objective was accomplished, basically we want to see what happened to cause you to accomplish the goal. And if the objective was not accomplished, we need you to document what happened that caused you not to be able to accomplish the goal. So this screenshot on the page, again, it's an Excel file. On the left-hand side of the page is the information that you will fill in a narrative form. On the right-hand side of the screen, you see step-by-step instructions on how to complete each question and each item within this report. This is due 90 days after the data is collected, so that's why it's due at the end of February. I don't feel like we need to spend a ton of time on this because we just did it. We just completed this in February. But of course, as always, if there are questions, put those in the chat or reach out to us anytime by email with any questions you may have. This is one of those reports where we recorded a short technical assistance video. So I hope that was helpful as you completed your report, and then you can refer back to that again next year when it's time to complete the UGG. The risk assessment, I will talk about this one also. This one we just completed. It was due by the end of March, so thank you to all of you who turned that in on time. I think we just have maybe just a couple colleges left that we're waiting on their report, so please just get that in as soon as possible. So here's a template. There are 2 separate templates. There's one for community colleges and one for technical colleges. The reason there are 2 different templates is because I filled in the state determined levels of performance for each of those types of colleges, and each type has a different set of numbers. At the top, you'll fill in your college's name. The year is filled in for you, so we're assessing in 2021, but we're using 2020 CAR data. So this is another report where you'll need the Consolidated Annual Report data that was collected in December to be able to complete this report. Basically, each cell that's highlighted in yellow is an area that the college should fill in. So you see the state determined level of performance for each of the indicators. So we're just looking for you to fill in what was the actual accomplishment of the college. And that will be listed on your CAR. And then it will automatically populate with a yes or no if you met 90% of the required, or 90% of the goal, which is required. In the populations not met column, this is where you fill in any of those subpopulations that did not meet the goal. So maybe the overall did meet 1P1 retention and placement, but maybe certain populations, for example, maybe Asian and single parents did not meet that goal. You would list those in the cell there under populations not met. Section B is percentage of the Perkins budget that was spent in the most recently completed fiscal year. So we were completing this in March of 2021, where we're looking back to the end of the most recently completed fiscal year to see, did we spend 100% of our budget, or did we only spend 75% of the budget? And you'll list that percentage there. I will tell you that if you don't spend at least 90%, somewhere between 90 to 100% of your budget, it does count as a point on this risk assessment, and I'll show you the breakdown of how points are acquired through this risk analysis score. Section C is the year of the last audit. This is explained in more detail in that technical assistance video on where do I go to find this audit. For our community colleges, you're typically looking at the Tennessee Comptroller's audit. For our TCATs, you're typically looking at our internal audit within TBR. And several of you reached out to me to ask, especially our TCATs, hey, can you tell me when was our last audit? And I shared that information with you. And you list any audit findings that exist, and then a short description of those findings. So our internal audit gives a description. Also, if you go to the Tennessee Comptroller's website for our community colleges, it will list a brief description of the findings, and you would list those in the yellow rows near the bottom. Section D is who is the Perkins coordinator, who oversees Perkins on your college campus. You would list their name, so likely that's you, right? Your start date as the Perkins coordinator. So you may have worked for the college for 15 years, but you've only been given the responsibility of Perkins coordinator for maybe the last 4 years. So that's the date we're looking for. How long have you been overseeing the Perkins grant? And then your number of years as the Perkins coordinator will calculate a score for you as well. So I'll show you our scoring in just a moment, but I believe if you've been Perkins coordinator for more than 4 years, then it's a 0 score. But if you're brand new, it is going to give you a risk assessment point there. And then Section E is the date the institution was last monitored. So monitored on the Perkins grant, Perkins funding. If you know the date of a last on-site monitoring, we'd like to see that listed there. If you don't have that information, we conduct monitoring annually. Every year in October, monitoring is due. So that may have been, in October of 2020, you may have completed a level 2 self-assessment monitoring. You could list that there. Maybe you completed a level 3 virtual monitoring. About 10 or 12 of our colleges completed virtual monitoring in October. You could list that. Of course, if you know the last date of on-site, list that as well. And then the very bottom is just asking for who completed the risk assessment and the date that you completed it. I do want to show you how we calculate this risk assessment score, or this risk analysis score. So each section, A, B, C, and D, calculates a score. And here's where we get this. And this is actually the second worksheet in the Excel file for the risk assessment. So colleges, you start with a 0 score, but for each indicator that you don't meet, that's a point. So you could end up with, hopefully not, but you could end up with 3 points from Section A if you didn't meet any of your performance indicators. For Section C, there's 1 point for each number of findings from the Tennessee Comptroller's audit, or if it's a TCAT, from our internal audit office. For Section D, this is related to the number of years that you've been the Perkins coordinator for your college. So more than 4 years, 0 points. Less than 4 years, 1 point. Less than 2 years, 2 points. And then it calculates a total score for you. This is one piece that we use to determine if an on-site monitoring or a full monitoring is a top priority or not. So this is just one piece that we use to help us determine that. Questions about The UGG or the risk assessment, I know we just completed those, so we've got a whole nother year to think about them again. But if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat. And then we're moving on to programs of study.
All right, programs of study. This is something that existed in Perkins 4. So this is something that most of you will be familiar with. We do have a process in Tennessee that each college is to submit a completed program of study, at least one per year, and it should be in a different program area than was previously. And this all stemmed from our last federal audit, and I said federal audit, that came through the U.S. Department of Education, which I was fortunate to be a part of, and a couple of our local colleges in the national area got to be a part of that as well, and high schools, as a matter of fact. But what that refers to is, you can see the definition there. I'm not going to go through that. But what that means is, as we move on to the next slide, which is the examples. Basically, these are a couple examples, one from a TCAT, one from a community college, that showed those program of studies. So as long as they are available in the high school. And how would they be available in the high school? A dual credit, a local dual credit, or a statewide dual credit, or a dual enrollment opportunity, or any type of an exam that allows for credit from high school that would give college credit. So any of those programs that have the availability to earn post-secondary credit while in high school is the definition of a program of study. Now, there is a non-example of a program of study would be truck driving, because a student has to be 18 years of age in order to get into a truck driving program that could not start in high school. So that would be a non-example of a program of study. So you see a couple of examples here. The one easier for me to read is the one in color there at the bottom. It's closer for my eyes. You have White Creek High School and Nashville State Community College that then goes on to MTSU. So you see in the different colors, the yellow that transfers from Criminal Justice 1. It's a dual credit alignment course that also gives 3 hours of credit at the college level, but also gives 3 hours credit at the bachelor's level. So if you have those, you don't have to go all the way through a bachelor's program. For a community or for a technical college, if you've got them that go through the associate level at the community college, that would be sufficient. If for some reason, if your program of study only starts at the high school but ends at your college, meaning that you give credit for it, that would be enough. So it doesn't have to go on to the next level. If it does, you would want to list that. Again, Congress really enjoys these reports. That's why it's part of the legislation. There was talk in Perkins 5 that there would be multiple programs of study, but the legislation currently says at least one program of study. In Tennessee, this is something we've done for years. So we were light years ahead of many states because of our Complete College Tennessee Act that was passed in 2010. So this is not unknown to your college. There are several colleges, by the way, that produce these in some type of electronic or written form, and they give it out to students at the high schools. This is the real goal of this process from the federal audit that we received, is that they would want, which makes sense for us as well, for parents and students to get this information at the high school level, because a student could look at the sheet, either one of these two sheets from either TCAT Knoxville or Nashville State, and see, wow, okay, I can get 12 credit hours going towards a program in law enforcement services, or the one in business management and administration from the TCAT. So they could get college credit hours while they're in high school. And that makes a difference. And if the students and parents know about that while they're high school students, then they're more likely to be able to follow that and try to do that. So that's the purpose of this program. Since there's Perkins dollars that are allocated to this, this is the goal of this, for these students to end up with a post-secondary credential. And credential is a terminology I think that we all understand on this call. So that's the goal of this process.
All right, for monitoring. So monitoring is due each year in October, and there are 4 levels of monitoring. Level 1 is desk monitoring, which is basically just a yes/no checklist with a couple of additional pieces. Level 2 is a self-assessment monitoring. Level 3 is virtual monitoring, and level 4 is on-site monitoring or a full monitoring. Each college must conduct monitoring each year, And each college should rotate through these levels of monitoring. So if in 2019 we did level 1, in 2020 we did level 2, 2021 we should be doing level 3, unless we contact you and say, okay, it's your turn for level 4 on-site monitoring or full monitoring. So here are some screenshots just to refresh your memory if you've been around, or maybe this is the first time you're seeing it if you're new to Perkins. These are just some pieces out of the level 1 desk monitoring worksheet. It's basically a yes or no check sheet where you are just conducting a self-assessment of your college and how you have used Perkins funds over the past year. So when we monitor, like I said, it's due in October, we are monitoring the most recently completed fiscal year. So when our college is monitored in October, you guys were looking at the 1920 year that ended on June 30th, 2020. There is also a section on equipment again. So if the college purchased equipment with Perkins funds in that year that you're monitoring, and only that year, then you would list those pieces of equipment there. This is not that ongoing equipment list. This is only if you purchased equipment with Perkins funds in the year that's being monitored. Some of our colleges don't use Perkins for equipment funds. They use their Perkins dollars to pay for salary. So section 4 is a Perkins personnel interview comment section, and there are a couple of items listed there that should be included, things like a job description and hours worked, and does this person have any other responsibilities outside of Perkins, things like that. So that's level 1. Level 2 is a self-assessment monitoring. You'll notice that the template for level 2, 3, and 4 are all the same. So the difference is this: with level 2, you complete a self-assessment on your own. So you're basically using this 5-point rubric, a scoring rubric that's listed at the top of the template, and you're reading through each item. There are 7 different main categories, and you're giving your college a score, 1 through 5. On 1 is no implementation at all, and 5 is we're awesome at this, exemplary implementation. For some of the items, you may need to insert a comment, so there's a column for comments. For many of the items, it's just a score. 1 through 5 is all that needs to be listed. The main sections here are fiscal and personnel records, indicators of performance and program use of funds, community and business involvement, special populations, data collection, linkages, and professional development. So this is just a very brief screenshot. The full template has all 7 of those areas listed. So with level 2, you score your college, and that's the end of it. With level 3 is virtual monitoring. Again, it uses the same template. So we start the process where you score yourself, then you turn it into us, and then we pick out at least 1 item from each of those 7 categories. And I'll highlight it and I'll put a little note or a comment and say, okay, please provide documentation for this item. So that you'll likely have to provide documentation for 7 or more items, typically 1 item from each of those 7 sections. So this is just a little more in-depth. You provide that documentation back to us, we look it over, review it, and we maintain that in our records. I think we had about 10 or 12 colleges in October who completed level 3 virtual monitoring. And then finally, level 4 on-site monitoring or full monitoring. We're using the same template, but this would be where we look at each of those items. So all 7 categories, each sub-item in each of those categories, we would review that. Typically in the past, it's been on-site, on your campus, in person, where we reviewed those items together. Moving forward, it may be a hybrid or some other I don't know, we may be back to on-site, who knows, right? But it would be a full monitoring review where we look at all of those different items. So really a best practice would be, if you're brand new to Perkins, start with level 1 and then work your way up. And you just rotate each year through levels 1 through 3 until we tell you, okay, it's your turn for a level 4 on-site monitoring. And as you work your way through the different levels, you're kind of preparing yourself for a level 4 monitoring anyway. Any questions on monitoring? It's going to be a while before this is due. It's not due until the end of October, so you've got a while to think about it. No questions? Okay. We are almost done. All right, technical assistance. So I just wanted to mention again the availability of technical assistance. So at the beginning of each month, I send out a monthly newsletter. The goal with this is just to have all the upcoming Perkins information in one place, so we're not sending emails out all the time. So make sure you check that monthly newsletter that is sent out at the very beginning of each month. It will give you information about the previous month's report. So if you see that your college's name is not listed there, you realize, oh no, we forgot to submit last month's report. So that's just an easy reminder to go in and submit the last month's report. It will give you information about the report that's due at the end of that month. I usually have a technical assistance video that's linked there where you can go and you can watch the technical assistance video for the report that's due that month. Then we have a monthly Q&A session. We typically host these every month if there's a report due. The months where we have these big meetings, April and December, we typically don't have the Q&A just because we have the opportunity in the longer meeting for Q&A. But the purpose of the Q&A is for at the beginning of the month, you go in and you watch the technical assistance video for the report that's due. You look over the template. You see if you have any questions. And if you do, you come to the Q&A session and ask those questions. The Q&As are not required. They're typically around the 15th, middle of the month. They don't last very long. We've had pretty good attendance with each one. We haven't had a ton of questions. We've had a few, but not a ton of questions. So I just want you to know they're not required, but I hope that you find that they're helpful. So, in the future, come up with some questions, bring them to the Q&A, because if you have the question, there's a good chance that someone else at another college has the same question. So we encourage you to ask. Of course, Microsoft Teams is where we're housing all of our Perkins documentation, so templates, samples, any additional information that you might need. There's also a folder there for college, I forgot how I labeled it. Shared college resources is basically what it is. After our December meeting, I created that folder, and I know there's at least a couple items in there from Roane State, so thank you, Roane State, for sharing those. They shared some information on some documents that they use for collecting information for their CLNA. So if you have something that you think would be a benefit to the Perkins team statewide and you want to share it, if it's been really helpful for you and your campus, you're welcome to add that to that folder. Or you can email it to me and I'll add it to the folder of shared college resources. One-on-one technical assistance upon request. So if, many times when a college has a brand new Perkins coordinator, they reach out to us and they say, okay, we need help. So we'll sit down and have a virtual meeting, that usually lasts a couple of hours where we step you through everything you need to know. Now that's overwhelming. So that's why we've tried to break down the monthly reports into those shorter technical assistance videos. But anytime you need one-on-one technical assistance, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and Michael. Even if it's for a short conversation by phone or through Teams, we're happy to schedule a one-on-one conversation with you anytime. Michael, do you want to add anything else to technical assistance or anything else? We're about to the end of our time together.
Yeah, I was just going to add that please provide any feedback about technical assistance. Thank you, Laura, for your Q&A comment. If there's other types of ideas that you all have for technical assistance, I know sometimes it's easier for those who are newer and are more confused about things to provide those. But we've already had one today about maybe upping some of the videos and providing some technical assistance on some of the acronyms and such, so we'll try to do that as well. But yeah, keep that information coming to us, because the whole goal of what we're doing, again, is to try and benefit the colleges. The easier we can make Perkins for you, the better off everybody is. So that's our goal. So keep those ideas coming, and we'll try to adapt as best we can to that.
Okay. Are there any questions? We are to the end of our agenda items. Before lunch, look at that, 11:10 Central Time, and we are through the agenda items. So we'll just allow some time for any additional questions. You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask verbally, or you can type your questions in the chat.
Shana, it's Amy again.
Yeah.
Really quickly, where will the recording of this be located? Because I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed with all the information that was presented, and I would like to be able to go back and review it.
Of course. I will post it in Microsoft Teams, so it will just be on that general channel. I'll post it there so that everybody gets that note. Well, not every. If you have notifications set up, it will notify you. But it will also, anytime I post something in the general channel, it also saves to an additional folder. So I'll make sure it's in both places, on the channel, and then under the Files tab, there will be a folder for this presentation. So I'll save it as a PDF and I'll put it there, and then I'll also post the recording. It may be just a little bit, it'll take it a while for this to, I guess, to upload, but I'll have it there in the next day or two.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So after the lunch break, when we come back, we will work with you all on your Perkins application. And if we need to, we can break up into different rooms depending on the questions. If somebody needs some particular help with what they're working on their first goal, for example, then we can talk through that, while one of Shannon or I can talk through that in a separate room through the Teams platform, while Shana or I stay available for the rest of the group. So that's going to be how we're going to work the afternoon. And so if you have questions, and if you for your application process, bring those back. But if you don't, make sure you bring your, I say yours, whether it's electronic or on paper, bring your guide for the application process, and actually just bring a blank application, or maybe something you've already started, because you probably have a pretty good idea how you're going to spend the funds next year. And if you do, let's go ahead and start that process to make it easier for you now. That's what this day is partially about. So we'll let Shana adjourn us for lunch, and then we'll return in another hour or so. Shana?
Okay, so from